Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. Thank you for joining me today. I've got a great show planned for you. Some really important follow-ups, a very important discussion about the overlap of Ukraine, the Azov movement potentially, and Israel's engagement in Gaza, which I think is an absolutely it's a wildly important story that I think it connects with a lot of different topics. But what's interesting is I'm already seeing this get dismissed as if it's not even possible. And the element that I've even shared on Twitter so far is not the only aspect of this. I've even found, and I think it's an I-24 Israel mainstream report about how Ukraine is volunteering, or Ukrainians are coming and volunteering, and which is very interesting because it's the conversation about mercenaries versus volunteers is the sort of like terrorism versus counterterrorism, right? They're only contracted employees when we're doing it, but they're mercenaries over there, terrorists over there. It's all the same difference at the end of the day. But ultimately, if you look at through the idea, something like Blackwater Academy, well, what's the ultimate difference here? That you agree with what the U.S. government is paying them to do? Because let's not forget, ultimately, some of the worst atrocities in history around the war discussion since the impetus of the United States have been the responsibility of the United States, or the war on terror. I mean, you guys know this stuff. It's interesting, though, to see the conversation around each of these wars, like Ukraine itself and Russia, or now with Israel and Gaza, and having more than just Ukrainian elements. We know that we have seen American mercenary groups there, or contracted, or whatever the term they want to use. Of course, they're fighting with their good guy allies, so they don't frame it that way. But it's an interesting conversation about how this paints the picture to, as I've been talking about, something larger than just the current dynamic around Gaza, as important and wildly consequential as it is. But we're also going to get into I'm going to start today actually with a conversation around the Gaza settlements once again, because I almost thought about framing the title today, the settlements confirmed, but I wouldn't say it's technically confirmed. I would even argue that the information we already showed, what you could argue was confirmed. The idea that they're already planning these outlines. You've already had officials state these things. You have the leaked plan, but now we've got a signed letter being directly written and signed by influential rabbis, openly calling for that exact dynamic, which to me simply adds to the main point that they're all involved. They are at least aware of the agenda, and they're standing up and saying, we need to complete this. We need to get them out of the way. We need to establish our settlements. It's very interesting, but all it really shows you is that this is exactly what the ultimate goal really was. Not about pinpoint targeting Hamas, which is so, I don't even like using the word comically because of how horrible the situation is, but just absurd how macabrely comical it is, the way that they're trying to act like what they're still doing is pinpoint targeting, which brings me to one of the most important things I want to talk about today, which is just a basic mathematical breakdown that I did around the numbers that we're discussing. I don't think I need to convince anybody out there with a brain and a heart of what's obviously happening, but I want to reach some of those people out there that may, the way I started that actually traps myself in insulting the people I'm trying to reach all of a sudden, which I learn my own lessons too. The point is the people that may not be able to see this. Again, I said they didn't have a heart or a friend trying to be funny, but some of these people out there may not see all the information. They may be manipulated by the people they think they can trust and so on. And I want to make sure I lay out these numbers to show you that regardless of all the different narratives around, I forget the way they framed it about the per bombs, and like they found some kind of the bottom line is if you take the amount of people that have been killed in Gaza, the amount of children alone, but everybody in particular, and break that down to how long it's been going comparatively to other wars. It's just on an average, I'm saying, not based on the bulk and the time frame. It'll blow your mind. And we'll get to it in a second about the sheer numbers we're discussing here, about how many people are dying every minute, which is in the title, by the way, and comparing that with Syria and Iraq, and let you decide what you think is really going on. Now, we're also going to go through some of the information that's being put out that I think is important to show you continually the narrative that's being spun for those that may be new to the show, or those that just need a reminder of how relentless this is right now, about how many things are being stated that we've proven that are false. It's like pretty much every other narrative. The difference here is that it's obvious that they're aware that we see through it, and it's just becoming increasingly desperate and increasingly dangerous for that very reason. And then I believe to end, we're going to talk about some of the overlaps of the civilians that were kidnapped, blindfolded, shot, and some of the things I wanted to follow up from yesterday. Now, to start, I wanted to make sure you didn't miss these articles, which I think are very important. Now, Derek just followed up on COP28. It's entitled COP28 Comes to an End. What does 2024 hold for the globalist gatherings? We just had an interview that I recorded on the 18th, aired today, that was about this topic. Now, what's really alarming about this, and I might even do its own focus, possibly tomorrow, which I'm kind of already earmarked for, for some of these kind of callback on the COVID-19 medical freedom focus. You know, who knows what changes by tomorrow, but that's what I'm thinking about today for tomorrow. And the point is that I might get into this deeper in that conversation, which is about his really important talking point from this, but as it applies to so many other topics about what is ultimately, as they frame, and this is coming from a World Economic Forum kind of great reset perspective. And this is where we're hearing this from, this meeting, the COP28 meeting, which all the same kind of elements, that what they're predicting is that, or really what they're saying is that we're currently in the poly crisis. We've talked about this already. And it's almost the same kind of game they played during COVID, where the tridemic and all these things are converging. It's the same kind of game they're playing. Even if you think that's real, it's the terminology. It's the way they're presented to you to make it a certain, and all of a sudden now we're outside of that a little bit. So now it's just, well, same idea, but polycrisis, climate change, and viruses over here, and wars breaking out all at the same time. Yeah, that's called life. Yeah, they know that. It's like when they start covering when they start covering hurricanes, and oh my God, it's 24-hour coverage of weather. You know, weather happens. And I think it's interesting that they can make it more important when they want to. So my point simply is that, yes, we have things like this that happen. There are severe weather events. War happens. Unfortunately, many of us are trying to stop that, though. But to frame all of that as some kind of ongoing unique thing, I'm pretty sure the world has seen horrifying overlapping of problems. Anyway, point is, maybe you think they should try to do something about that. The point is, they're not trying to stop any of it. They're trying to utilize your fear of those things to drive in the next step. But this is where they bring in the next idea. Well, they go, well, what we see it building into, because we can't stop these things. One ends, or rather a new one starts, and the old ones haven't stopped. So what do you know? I feel like we're driving into what they're calling a perma crisis. Just think about the idiocy of even using that term. Perma meaning permanent. So we're in a forever crisis. Isn't that a little too much on the nose? It's exactly what we're always talking about. They always need you to be in like this midst of fear, the ongoing war focus, or all of a sudden something new. And they just roll you into the next fear tactic to keep you always on the edge of your seat. Well, then they're just going to go right over the top and go, well, you know what? We're in a perma crisis forever. So just maintain that fear. Well, then what they're talking about is establishing or acknowledging a planetary emergency. That's the biggest concern here for me on this, is that they're already talking about this. There are already people pushing the idea that we need to declare a planetary emergency. Interestingly enough, from different points and different reasonings. I'm sure you can imagine climate change is one of them for some people. But all it really amounts to is the end of your sovereignty, not even just from a WHO pandemic agreement perspective, which is now what they're calling it, but from every point: financial, health, foreign policy, everything. And they're literally rolling out plans and talking points and agreements in different meetings for every one of these. And they're all converging into a new phase of control for your life. It really is as terrifying as it sounds. And even if they have good intentions, whatever that means to you, it still amounts to absolute top-down control, which seemingly, weirdly, coincidentally, is where everything they do leads. You should read into that. Please do. But read the article. It's a great article. We will be following up on this. In the interview, we also touch on the fluoride trial, which, by the way, if you'd like to donate to that, the Give, Send, Go is still out. I think I have it listed in the show notes, I believe. But we're trying to raise money to send him there. But we also have a lot more going on in that regard. Robert wrote an excellent article yesterday called "Will the U.S. Save Israel from Itself?" And this is not even from a pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian kind of perspective. This is just really about a kind of static understanding that the U.S. has an ability at this moment to sort of save whatever you believe Israel is. And trust me, Robert has written a lot about why that in the essence of what the Israeli government is should not even be a thing. Not necessarily that the Israelis and those that believe that necessitates some kind of specific Jewish state should not have their own area. But the point is simply that this is what he is doing, what Netanyahu is doing, what the Religious Zionism Party is doing. They are the ones destroying their country. And again, if you listen to Israelis and Jews in Israel, they're screaming about that right now. Some of them may think some other parts of the government are salvageable, but they are very heated about it. And it's interesting how most of the West doesn't really pick up on that. But the article's point is simply that will the U.S. step in to do something about this, or will they let this kind of peter? Well, and my point is, if they let it peter out, is that will become the acceptance of genocide, which it already is. Let's be honest. But even if they want to let this play out to then shift the cards and end up with somebody new in power, you still are complicit with allowing one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. So good article to understand where the politics may lie, but it doesn't remove them from accountability of what's going on. Brock also put out a great clip when we just recently followed up on the East Palestine discussion. If you didn't see that, and you haven't seen this clip or having seen the discussion points in this is about 50 minutes long. I recommend you watch it. It is really unnerving to see what's still happening in East Palestine. People actually, it may blow your mind, are still getting sick. They're still getting sick. And there are still increasing problems. And now everything's rolling back the way it was. Norfolk Southern's basically pulling funding for people they promised they would help right now, right about Christmas time. Very nice of him. And it's just, anyway, I don't want to get into it. It'll make me frustrated again, but please know what's going on there and understand how horrible the people are we're dealing with that don't care about you and the toxic soup that we're living in. Now, I wanted to start with the point about Donald Trump, because I could not include that. And then we're going to get into the point of the settlements to start off our main conversation about Gaza. But you may have seen this. Before I even get into that, I want to just point this out, which seems to be interestingly timed. Al Gore recently said about a week and more ago, the social media algorithms disrupt democracy and need to be banned. Now, of course, plenty of people will read this as they're trying to stop free speech on Twitter because you're trapped in the two-party illusion and you're wrong about that. But the people who don't think that don't want to hear me on that, despite how obvious it is to prove how many people have been censored since that claim was made, and or those that have yet to be brought back, like Jason Bassler or people like that. But regardless of all of that factual information, they omit to make the claim that it's all free speech. It doesn't change the fact that what he's ultimately saying is social media algorithms disrupt democracy. So all it really means is that we need to alter the way we're controlling your speech, because the way it currently is not truly. Now, you can read into that as if that means that some level of this is happening and some that may be due to free speech on Twitter. I don't think that's the case. Either way, all he's really saying is our algorithms are not controlling your speech well enough. I just think that's hilarious and so obvious, where they're ultimately trying to tell you that we are controlling your speech and we need to do it better because democracy doesn't work when you can express yourself, ladies and gentlemen. That's how it works. And on that note, you might have heard that the Supreme Court of Colorado, because they have that right, no, not really, declared Donald Trump ineligible to run, at least on the ballot in Colorado. Now, this is really ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't matter what you think about Donald Trump in this context. Donald Trump was not found guilty of insurrection. And I'm going to get into why that is important. I mean, it should be obvious, really, but a state Supreme Court does not have the right to unilaterally declare that they think, because of their definitions and their perspective, that he committed or incited insurrection when that has not been a legal finding in a court of law. People can yell at him and charge him with all they want. He has not gone through a court process where they legally found him guilty of any of those things. So this just becomes politicization by children, by two-party illusion, naive people who think that this is, and quite frankly, that they believe that doing this is saving democracy. And that's the most hilarious point about it. First of all, the illusion that we have some kind of democracy is childishly stupid at this point. It's like pretending that Israel's not murdering people in Gaza. It's really dumb. But even if you think that, is your mindset that by going out of your way in a very specific, not legally backed way to stop the person who you don't like, and even if you think he is destroying democracy, by doing that, by literally undermining what you call democracy, you think that's saving democracy? It's the same thing that happened before with Trump again. The idea that they literally have that secret cabal, what was it? I forget what website that wrote about that. Was it Newsweek? That basically openly were like, yeah, we did this. We colluded to save democracy. Or you colluded to get what you wanted politically and called it saving democracy. But that also drives the point that making people in the right-wing side of this more so firmly believe that he's the one fighting for you. Why? Because they went after him. Derek and I just went off on this in our interview. That may be the case. I'm not disputing that's a possibility, but it's again, the same level of childish mentality to believe that if they go after him, therefore he is what you want him to be. Like they can't think past that Gordian knot. Like, oh my God, that's super complicated. Let's just go after him. So they think he's on their side. Oh my God, that's so incredibly complicated. Trust me, that sometimes happens. The original still happens too, where they do actually go after people that are actually on your side. But it can't be that simple. We can't just assume that if they do, he is, because that's how you get played in this game. But the main point is, again, regardless of what you think about him, this is a political action to stop Donald Trump from being on the ballot in one location, which is guaranteed to cause absolute mayhem. Because first of all, whatever happens next, just this one move has opened this door. And that's very dangerous. But what happens if other states do it? Right? I mean, I already heard that like Vivek said that he was going to pull out of the ballot in Colorado if they went forward with this. And I think DeSantis came out and said he wouldn't. People are acting like that's destroying him. I mean, people have their opinions on where that'll go. My point is that if it ends up where this really is held this way, you can't have a legitimate election. You're going to have people arguing that because Trump didn't have Colorado, if it ends up that way, or whatever other states that follow, that it's an illegitimate election. And quite frankly, they're right. But then you're going to have other people that try to act in a violent way because they may genuinely feel that this is the same kind of, it's almost as if they're trying to initiate yet again what they tried to push in January 6th. That point becomes especially relevant when we get into the point about the Ukrainians fighting in Gaza. Now, this says under the article from the AP, this is from today or yesterday. A divided Colorado Supreme Court on Tuesday declared former President Trump ineligible for the White House under the U.S. Constitution's insurrection clause and removed him from the state's presidential primary ballot, setting up a likely showdown in the nation's highest court to decide. So it's not technically, it might not happen in general, and maybe this is the whole point to get us talking about it, but it says to decide whether the front runner for the GOP nomination can remain in the race. And even that point exactly, removing the front runner from the race, like, come on. This is unjustified. No matter if Trump is everything you thought he was. It's not democracy when you remove people. I mean, let's be clear. That's the whole point why it never is in the first place. When the largest voting bloc in this country are the people that don't partake in the election. And then the largest voting bloc from those that do partake are independents, registered. And yet we still go left, right. It's democracy. It's so childish. We all seem to know it. Or the very Princeton study that I cite all the time that found that the average voter has a minuscule, near zero, statistically insignificant outcome on policy. That's a direct quote from the Princeton study that found that we live in an oligarchy. But we don't care about the facts in this country when it comes to our two-party paradigm. Anyway, justices were all appointed by Democratic governors, which matters. This is the whole point about what do they call packing the whole point about why they try to go back and forth about stopping or removing or adding judges. And, the point is that, yes, it does make a difference because today judges are not, or maybe they never were, what they're supposed to be, which is sort of apolitical, only based on the Constitution, but nobody really is. But now today we've completely created the decaying political situation where people in every position of power believe it's their almost their duty now to do the opposite of what their job is. Contradict the Constitution to save what they believe is what it would be without Trump or whatever. It's pretty ridiculous. But for the first time in history, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has been used to disqualify a presidential candidate. Now, here's what's very interesting about this, and this is why it's so important. Well, I'll read these first. This is what Greg Price wrote. The Colorado Supreme Court removed Donald Trump from the ballot, even after a lower court judge in Denver, who was a longtime Democrat, don't rule against it. And he just writes, because democracy is when a handful of partisan judges prevent people from being able to vote for who they want. I mean, it doesn't matter if you agree with the politics or not. This is the exact point. You are now making the choice to decide for everybody else because you're arguing it's just that important. Well, you know what? That excuse can be used for literally anything, and that's what they always do. It's the emergency from COVID-19. It's the EUAs for the shots. It's everything. It's the way they play this game. It's an emergency. It's an urgency, right? It's emergency governance. We've been here for a long time now. And This is interesting, by the way. Now, I haven't followed up on this just yet, but Lawyers for Laws points out the Lawfare Group crew that filed multiple lawsuits against Trump since 2017, including removing Trump off the ballot in Colorado, is listed as tax-exempt, nonpartisan 501c3. How many lawsuits have they brought against Democrats? So the point is, when you read into this, the point he's making is it's very interesting how this is a group that is aimed kind of predominantly or specifically at Republicans and more specifically at Trump. But when you read the rules for 501c3s, which is just a nonprofit, it says these organizations are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in, intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elective public office. Right? It says conducted in a nonpartisan manner, do not constitute prohibited political campaign activity. It says voter education or registration activities with evidence of bias that would favor one candidate over the other, oppose a candidate in some manner, have the effect of favoring a candidate or group of candidates, will constitute prohibited participation or intervention. So you could make the valid legal argument that what this 50C3 is doing, 501c3, is against the rules that pertain to a 501c3. Which, it's the same thing. This is how, lobbyists work, super PACs, PACs in general. I mean, it's ways they can pretend that what their illegal activities are somehow protected under the law. That's always what they do, right? We've talked about this so many times over the years, the War Powers Act, Patriot Act. Essentially, these things are the way that they, like Ron Paul used to make this point all the time, that you'll have a thing that we're all going, that's bad, we don't like that. And they go, oh, we hear you. We're going to fix that problem. So they write a law that makes that thing legal. Well, they solved the problem, didn't they? They're not breaking the law anymore. Well, we're over here going, what the hell did you just do? We just said we don't want you doing that. Well, we fixed the problem. It's not breaking the law anymore, so shut up. That's how this works. Happens all the time. Smith Modernization Act. If you don't know what that is, you should look it up. It's when they legalized propagandizing American population for national security, of course. They took a law that said it was illegal and they modernized it and made it legal. For your best interest, of course. And ever since then, we have watched the decline of what we call media and everything else, even more so than before. Now, 14th Amendment. This is cornelllaw.edu. It reads specifically, no person shall be a senator or representative of Congress. Now, one of the arguments being made is that this doesn't seem to apply to the president. I flatly disagree with that. I could read everything for you here. The point is, it ultimately says, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, which includes the president, or under any state who has previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States. It just lists all this stuff off, basically saying no person shall be any of these things. To support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection. So no person in any of these positions shall have engaged in insurrection, rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. So, to be clear about this, and this is a legal concept. It's not just, I believe that you did this. And that's what this next point is. So first of all, before we even get into the legal part of it, do you think that Donald Trump was engaged in insurrection? I know some people do. Or gave aid or comfort to people that did. And now if you think the second part, then you have to prove that people did in fact engage in insurrection. Not because Democrats said so or Republicans, but because they were legally found guilty. So that's never happened. Not a single person who went to who got charged with whatever happened on January 6th was actually charged with insurrection. They were charged with I forget what the term, things, breaking and entering and all the other things around it, right? And so here's the legal term of insurrection. And yes, this is a legal term. It's not just some random definition in a Webster dictionary. This is a legal term, which is different. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined and imprisoned. This is so to accuse him of this or to have aided that One of two things has to happen. First, somebody would have had to have charged Donald Trump with insurrection. He would have had to go to court and defend himself against it, and he would have had to have been found guilty of insurrection. Secondly, if you think it was aid or support, well, then somebody else had to have been charged with insurrection, and then you'd have to actually prove that he went into as so far as to aid them, and that would have to be proven in a court of law. This is not just court of public opinion here. So the idea that Colorado can just make this arbitrary assessment and do this based on dictionary terms that they literally cite in this discussion is wild, guys. This is, I actually think this is intended to cause the very collapse of what they say. Like, a lot of people are talking about this election might not happen. I jokingly talk about that. They say that every time. Every day I feel like this is more likely. This is the first thing so far. I'm like, man, that literally could end, just this one thing could end to them having something where the election doesn't happen the way it should. Just, I think this is important, and we have to be honest about this. If you're a Democrat out there and you hate Donald Trump, be objective and have the courage to be honest about this, even though you hate Donald Trump. This is unjustified and, quite frankly, illegal. Now, I will follow up on this. I kind of think this is going to get intense, but this is an overlap. Keep a pin in this story. I want to start with the conversation of the Gaza settlements because I want to follow up from the last show, but we're going to, after that, get right into the conversation of, oh, never mind. I'm going to try to go through this quickly. After that, another segment, we're going to get into the conversation of the Azov overlap. And this is what's so interesting to me in this conversation is Donald Trump is being called an insurrectionist because of January 6th, which the main point there is that on January 6th, let's not forget, this was part of it. January 6th, there were Azov movement members there. This guy, Sergei Dubinin, screaming things in Russian, even though he's Ukrainian and a part of the Azov movement. We've talked about this for a very long time. January 6th was always a very clear government operation. It's just no disputing this anymore. Look at the Truth in Media work that's come out. I mean, this is a very obvious story. So keeping that in mind, now that Donald Trump is there, now they're almost overlapping these stories. It's interesting, right? So now he's going to be removed. They're claiming because of an insurrection that they then used or driven forward. That includes Israel, by the way, because let's not forget, Israel is funding and always has been funding the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Rights groups demand Israel stop arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They're talking about the Azov militia. And Kolomoisky, who is the chief financier of the Azov movement and Zelensky's campaign, part of the World Jewish Congress, all stems directly through Israel and created this and are funding the most obvious neo-Nazi element on the planet. It's ringing true for a lot more people today, seeing as how the Lehigh Party even tried to align itself with Nazi Germany twice in the past. We'll go over that in a minute. But consider this as we talk about the Donald Trump aspect and why all this seems to be converging. So let's start here with what is really happening on the ground. The Gaza settlements is something that we should not be dismissing because all of that then adds to the point of what was really the main goal here. Ethnic cleansing, complete demolishing of the area, and likely the people along with it. The idea of pinpoint targeting Hamas, despite them literally stating it's about destruction, not accuracy. Right? The point is that it's obvious that they went into this engagement with the idea of ethnic cleansing, just like they did from the very beginning, the Zionist entities I'm talking about. So that then shows you the kind of genocidal intent we're discussing that aligns with the same mindset that would be funding Nazis in Ukraine. Now, we just talked about this, the plan for a new Gaza-Israeli settlement. Now here, Tali shared, thank her for sharing the main document itself, media.chabad.info. This is coming from I'll just read you directly from the Post. It's saying senior rabbis collectively are sending this to the Israeli war cabinet. It says Israel must resettle in all areas of Gaza that were given to the enemy and exert security control over all areas in the occupied territories. Now, alone, you could argue, well, that's just rabbis who are expressing their opinion. And yeah, that is what it is. But the reason this is happening, in my opinion, and I believe that there was some more, there's some good commentary underneath it, is because this has already been stated openly by members of the Israeli government, by the top echelon of their leading coalition. We just showed you this from the 17th of this month. Israel should make Gaza look like Auschwitz. That's literally a statement from the head of the Metula Council proposing sending all Gazans to refugee camps in Lebanon. And plenty of Jews spoke up on Twitter. They're going like, oh my God. One of them directly said, I can't even imagine being as a Jew myself, he said, I can't imagine ever saying this. Like, and what he said right after that, which is what any honest, I showed you a Holocaust survivor that said the same thing yesterday. Never again means never again for anyone. They're openly pointing out what Israel's doing is the same thing. This is genocide, guys. And when you listen to what they're saying, it's saying after October 7th, instead of urging people to go south, which is what they pretend they're trying to do, we should direct them into the beaches. The Navy can transport them to the shores of Lebanon, where there are already sufficient refugee camps. Then a security strip should be established to the sea and Gaza border fence, completely empty. It should resemble the Auschwitz concentration camp. That's what he said. Just in case you're a little confused about what they really are trying to do here. Now, here's an Israeli minister calling for genocide, saying, I don't care about Gaza. I don't care. They can go out and swim in the sea. Right. So when Palestinians chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, and they call that genocide, these people go literally, they can jump in the ocean. And it's like, well, you misunderstand them. You're racist. That's how this game is being played.
I don't care about Gaza. I literally don't care. For all I care, they can go out and just swim in the sea. I want to see dead bodies of terrorists around Gaza.
Right. Of course, when they say dead Gaza terrorists, what they're really saying is any Palestinian present in Gaza. And this is the reality. We need to understand this. It's not my opinion. It has been explicitly stated more than once by the president of Israel telling you there is nobody innocent over there, from Netanyahu saying they need to all of them be completely genocided like Amalek. It's over and over and over. Here, by the way, was a video that Dan Cohen still has. All these people saying, look at how they're training their children to kill all these people. Well, I disagree with that, quite frankly. And all the things they tend to show come from wrong places or come from groups that Israel was funding. It's obvious if you know what's going on. But the real point, and that's not to suggest that there are not people in Gaza that want to kill Jews. I'm sure that exists in a lot of places. Sort of like there's clearly a lot of Israelis that just like watching Palestinians die, right? See, we can be objective and look at all of it. Seems like from certain people, all they can do is point at one direction while calling us racist, I guess, or one-sided. It's hilarious. But the point was, these were children in Israel singing publicly for a massive just presentation, I guess. I was going to say display and then find it was something else. They were singing, "We will annihilate everyone." And this is what it says, guys. The video was uploaded and then deleted by state broadcasters of Con News. Then, guess what? YouTube went ahead and deleted it for them. Oh, it's a violation of terms of service. Isn't that interesting how, and they act like, well, they're out there calling for genocide. Don't you agree that's bad? Well, yeah, we do. But the problem is you seem to only delete the ones that make the Israeli entities look bad while allowing absolutely disgusting things that are happening when it doesn't align with exactly the Israeli government. It's just like on Twitter. It's a very self-serving censorship when they keep deleting images that prove they lied about things they posted, or they used images from 2022 to claim women were raped. Yeah, that matters. When you allow children destroyed all over your platform, but delete an image that's barely even graphic because it shows something that proves they lied. The point is, watch Israeli children sing, "We will annihilate everyone in Gaza" was censored off of the Intifada's channel, Electronic Intifada, on YouTube. Blatant censorship to protect the image of the genocidal state of Israel. Now, we just showed you this. A house on the beach is not a dream. An Israeli real estate company specializing in Jewish settlements in the West Bank is now planning for the day after in Gaza. This has been openly discussed. Here's the actual website. Oops, didn't mean to close that. Actual website. Orwell sent me this. You can read it for yourself. And the point here, earlier this week, the coalition of settler organizations generously funded by the state of Israel held the practical preparation for the Gaza Settlement Conference. This is not hypothetical. They're literally having official meetings about, and this is not settlements for people to come back that are Palestinians. Listen to them. They're talking about moving them out. We don't care where they go. We're building our settlements for Jewish Israelis only. Not even just Israeli. You have to be a Jewish Israeli to have one. That's how obvious the racism is in the area. And Kim Iverson makes the point to highlight the fact that they're openly sharing that they are not targeting a school with Hamas members. As she writes, this school is clearly being blown up by planted explosives, like a controlled demolition, guys. meaning that it wasn't filled with Hamas members, that they went in, they placed all of these things carefully, and then went back and then waited and then executed it. And you know what it is? It is a United Nations school for children. Of course, when you, Hamas was there, and I'll show you a picture of some guns on a floor somewhere, and we'll say that's proof that we did it because Hamas. Yeah, that's what keeps happening. Here's an image of a gun. Doesn't that prove it to you? Aren't we okay now? Here's what they're doing. The United Nations in northern Gaza. Right? You can clearly tell. She's right. And they're all cheering about it. Yay. And like I said, they're planning to build illegal settlements in Gaza. I believe this is in preparation for that. Sort of like the bulldozers and everything else we showed you. Now, I'm not going to play this right here because I'm going to play it further down the line in the show, but I want to just add this to the point. The ex-chief of Israel's Shin Bet security service drew attention to a contentious perspective, suggesting that specific proposed Israeli strategies in Gaza are intended to create a humanitarian crisis as a political objective. That shouldn't surprise anybody, guys. That's what's blatantly happening unless you just choose to go along with what Israel says is happening. Like when they say they want a two-state solution. And I come out and say, no, they don't. And they say, you're a racist Jew hater because you don't think so. And then they literally say that to their people every day for the last 10 years. That's what's happening. If you choose to listen to what they're actually saying, they continue to tell you that they're going to remove these people, that nobody is innocent, and they just don't care. But then, of course, when Biden speaks for them or they speak to the corporate media, well, it's quite a different story. And he says this is intended to create a crisis, and it bears resemblance to the tactics employed by groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And there's an obvious reason for that. Now, a member of the EU Parliament spoke up and said that he has no doubt that Israel, on top of all of that, is doing exactly what he just said, deliberately frustrating humanitarian aid while they pretend it's Hamas's fault.
So this is the main truck park. You can see all the way back that way, as far as the eye can see. And this is all parked up here, all the way back there. And as you go through here, you can see that there's the same on this side, all the way up as far as the eye can see, and all the way back there. So what we're looking at is an absolute travesty, because I'd say we've just been to the Rafah crossing, and maybe one truck is getting through every hour. And there's 2.3 million people really suffering from want of food, fuel and medicine. And humanitarian access is just a basic right of people in conflict, and it's been denied to them.
Right. There's just no way around it. Like, you just can't keep pretending that, well, if we let it in, Hamas might get it. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that what you're doing is a war crime. And this is the game they keep playing. They have all their sycophants online screaming, even though it's very clear that the vast majority of people don't agree, that it just somehow makes it okay. That you're just like terrorism. You just hate Jews. And it's like, it's just not, why that's not working as even though it used to, is because they're starting to use that against the people who would otherwise blindly support them, who just are able to go, well, it's kind of obvious that's happening. And they start accusing them of hating Jews. And they're going, whoa, wait a minute. I've had your back my entire life. Suddenly they start going, oh, okay, I do see how this works. I do see how you get accused of this because you actually accuse the Israeli government of committing crimes. And so they just, and what that does is actually truly makes Jewish people less safe. It's just so amazing how obvious this is, and people are starting to pay attention. Now here is another example of that. This is Sky News. Appears to show a soldier setting fire to humanitarian aid. Because, it's all about protecting everybody, right? Destroying property of Gaza is what he's saying. It's water and supplies. That's what it is. And the reason we know this is because they even went as far as to say, well, IDF says they told Sky News they took action. Disciplinary measures will be taken. Quite frankly, I don't believe that. But even if they were, what does it show you? That people in the IDF or people in this position are of this mind in some cases, if not all of them. Because why would you question this if the Israeli government is openly saying there's nobody innocent, openly saying that if aid comes through, it's helping Hamas, openly saying that, everything they say, and then they burn this. Well, doesn't that line up with what they're saying? But we're going to take action against them. Hardly. They're doing exactly what you're saying. They just got caught. Now, here is the president of Israel, the one who said there's nobody innocent in Gaza. speaking with the Atlantic Council, who has no interest in the truth whatsoever. And you can tell by her ridiculously softball question, asking when he says, or rather when Biden finally says a fraction of the truth, that they're indiscriminately bombing. Instead of asking honest questions like many of the corporate media are now, which I have a point about that in a second, and saying, well, we have plenty of evidence that you're killing more children than anywhere else in any conflict. And no. You know what her question was? Where were you when you heard that? How did it make you feel? That's it. What a journalist, right? Go ahead and tell me how angry it made you that Biden said the false thing that we're all supposed to say is false because it's false and false and false. Right? That's what it is. We know that's not true because we're all on your side blindly. So tell me how you felt when you heard that lie. Great journalism.
You will have seen last week where President Biden warned that Israel is losing support, international support, because of indiscriminate bombing, his words. Would you share where you were when you heard that? What went through your mind?
First of all, I don't think we are carrying out any indiscriminate bombing.
Right. So ignore the fact that you have an AI mass assassination program termed that by IDF members speaking with 972, or admitting that they just take down buildings to take down buildings, or admitting that the entire purpose of this was to kill more Palestinians, or to have him literally say there's nobody innocent in Gaza, or have a minister at least recently just say on the media that we don't care what happens to them, or on and on and on, or they literally have examples of them shooting Palestinians. It's just painful that we have to even engage with this. You watch them literally execute people in the street and they go, we're not discriminately bombing, or we're not doing that. But I can see you doing it. No, you're wrong though. We're not. And they go, okay, you're not. Like, that's the kind of mentality from these people. They just go along, or people standing up in the Commons or in Congress, just reciting the narrative. There's Hamas in hospitals and schools, and we have to stand with Israel. That we are long past that. They have not only failed repeatedly to even barely prove that, they've been caught lying about when they try by the corporate media. It's just painful. The thing we're going to get to next is the indiscriminate bombing, because that's what's happening. 5 Palestinians every minute. Every minute. I've been live for 43 minutes, guys. That's 5 Palestinians every minute since we've been live. And he's not indiscriminately bombing, though, because he says so. Because what we claim in alliance with international law. I mean, it really makes you I'm honestly trying to not let this bother me as much, but it physically bothers me, because this is horrifying. This is my point, guys. I say it all the time. This is what gets me the most. Not just people doing bad things, but people that are doing bad things acting like they're doing it for good reasons, or that they're not even doing the bad thing. That what they're doing is for fighting terrorism as they murder children in the streets.
All our activities are followed very closely by legal counsel. I think we're one of the armies which has more lawyers in each unit in proportion than any other army. We check.
Oh, right. Because, you got a bunch of lawyers with you, then that makes it okay, because we all trust lawyers, right? Because honestly, typically lawyers with you on your side are the ones that typically call you out for crimes, right? Right? When you have a lawyer representing you in a court of law, he's usually the one that goes, you're a criminal. Hardly. Your lawyers work for you, bud. We're not dumb, okay? It's absurd, the kind of things they're putting forward. But remember, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, literally everybody who has any standing in that conversation has come out and said that they're indiscriminately bombing, that this is genocide, that they are literally targeting civilians, which in fact I'm going to go over next, but just so you can see it. Wipes out entire families. Damning evidence of war crimes, Israel attack. I mean, it says it right here, indiscriminately bombing civilians. And it's not just because Amnesty says that, but their investigation finding that most definitely adds to it. But it's just the effing reality, guys. It's in your face. It's obvious. The numbers alone.
Targets. We alert people in advance. We send millions of leaflets. We send millions of text messages. We call.
Nope, they've exposed this. They've called them out for it. As Amnesty, one of the main things they investigated, they found out that they told one person on the street, then bombed the building within 5 minutes. An entire building full of people. as if that one person would somehow inform everybody. Or they drop leaflets in places that had nothing to do with where they bombed. Or they don't drop leaflets and they bomb areas that they aren't supposed to be bombing. Or they tell them to go to a safe place and they bomb the safe place. Or they tell them to go and they bomb them on the way. Or they bomb all three locations, where they are, where they're going, and where they're supposed to be going. And they bomb the Rafah crossing. But none of that matters to these investigation discussions, or investigative journalists, excuse me. It's painful.
People, we give them hours to prepare. If there are
Lies. Literally proven to be lies.
sites,
Or how about the idea of the phones? We know that most of these people don't have electricity in most of these locations, as much as they keep trying to lie about that. And that doesn't mean everybody, guys, because there are some places that do have what they've created, by the way, right? We saw them using seed oils to run these things and generators, which could then charge some level of, there is some stuff happening. And yes, there is some stuff coming through, barely. So every time you see somebody with a phone, they go, see, and it's, yeah, their phones exist. The point is that there's so little access to them that most people don't have the ability to look at your ridiculous text messages if you're even sending them. Why would we believe they're sending them when they're telling you that nobody's innocent?
that are questionable, we prefer not to carry out the attack.
Hardly.
Unfortunately, in such a dense areas, there could be damages that are very tragic. We know it, but we do, according to international law, we alert people very.
Oh, so that's all that matters, right? So as long as you go, we're going to bomb there, then international law doesn't apply. What fantasy world is he living in?
Very cautiously, so there's no indiscriminate bombing, and we seek advice and exchange opinions and views with.
Okay, so let's just take the word indiscriminate. Okay, if the argument is we're going after Hamas, right, and that we're doing our best to avoid civilian casualties, us being them, obviously, and then you find out that they've killed 20,000 people, and there's only 30,000 Hamas members, then you could prove that very few of those are Hamas, if any. So it's like a 99-to-1 ratio here. And that's not indiscriminate. You're killing like far, 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 far more innocent people than you are the one you're claiming to go for. But somehow that's not indiscriminate. It's just, it's desperation. You know you're caught. You know everything you're doing is clearly go in the direction of what you claim you're not doing. So you just lie about it. You go, not true. That's incorrect. You hate Jews. Can we move on? Painful. Now, let's not forget how one thing like this can challenge everything they're saying. Explain for me how on October 10th, the Israeli government can say on the record, quote, we're focused on maximum damage. Oh, excuse me. I forgot about this. You'll laugh at this again. They changed this. You'll see why it matters. It's just, this is how obvious it is that this is damage control on a real scale. Even though the new headline says basically the same thing, the original said very clearly, emphasis is on damage, not accuracy. So explain for me how you can say that. Accuracy is secondary, but we're only going after Hamas. We're doing everything we can, unless it's about accuracy, of course, but everything else. It's so blatantly obvious that we're being lied to. And then, of course, they then changed it a couple weeks later to say we're focused on maximum damage, because what that ultimately does is hides the real point that it was in lieu of accuracy. That is cover up stuff. That's the Guardian lying to you, knowingly altering their headline, and mind you, without any kind of an update. Do you see anywhere where it goes, A, asterisk, we changed the headline? Oh, you know what? It does say that right there. No, that's even worse. That's even worse. I didn't see this last time. What he's saying is they misquoted what he said. Guys, they did not. This was, anyway, I'll circle back to that in another show, most likely, and prove this to you. They're lying about it. They're lying about what he said to hide the fact that what he really clearly said was the reality that we're watching play out, that they're clearly focused on damage. And then the 972 article makes that even more clear. But the point was, again, to show you that even as he lies about indiscriminate killing, that the human rights groups are calling that. They investigated only 5 cases between October 7th and 12th. That's it. Can you even imagine how many there are since then? And in each of the cases they investigated, Israel violated international law. Every one of them, definitively, including by failing to take actions to spare civilians, carrying out just indiscriminate attacks, literally That's on the record, exactly that claim. Indiscriminate attacks, or just literally targeted civilians. All three of those. But Azov says you're a liar. So apparently Amnesty now is Hamas, which guess what, guys? That's actually being stated again. But here's the corporate media. This is from today. Israel airstrikes killed dozens more Palestinians across the Gaza Strip, right? So again, the point is, why? Why is this now happening? And my honest opinion here, guys, I can't know for sure what their mindset is, but I do believe that this is more organic than it appears. And my point would be that if I was guessing right now, I would say that it seems likely that the corporate media is very aware that their audiences, even the normie audiences, are like, you're crazy. That's so far. It's obvious what Israel's doing. We all see it. It's obvious. And so I think that at this point now, we're just like Biden, we're watching them try to gain a level of credibility back by essentially telling the truth. I think that's honestly what's happening. This is a level of trying to like regain some kind of credibility by suddenly telling the truth about Israel. That'd be my guess. But either way, we should be on guard for whether this is entirely a setup, right? Driving us into some sort of action. I'm never forgetting that. And neither should you. We also shouldn't ignore everything that's happening because you think that might be what's happening, right? Engage with what we can prove and be on guard for how it might be used against us. That's the only thing you can do. Entertain every possibility, question everything. Same point. So Arnaud Bertrand writes, and this is where we get into the numbers. It is absolutely extraordinary to him that the U.S. would rather, one, completely obliterate whatever remained of its moral standing, which is pretty much nothing in the world, two, risk a regional conflict, and three, cause economic pain to itself and the world, rather than use its leverage to tell a very tiny country to stop waging an insanely immoral war, which, by the way, is also against their interests, which is clear. Now, in fact, I don't know if he means right there, I believe he means Israel, but either way you look at it, it's against U.S. interest, and it's obviously against Israeli interests. Maybe not the religious Zionism coalition, or you could maybe even argue the government, but the point is the Israeli people, which is what we all pretend these countries are supposed to be acting in the interest of, even though anybody smart enough knows that's not true. But he says this is undoubtedly something that will puzzle many historians in the future. Now, I disagree. The sentiment I agree with, but I don't think it's that confusing. I think, just like I said in the beginning, the reason this was so jarring is because the Israeli government took an extreme action that they thought they would be able to use their same Hasbara control to make go away, and it didn't, because they didn't have enough, that it failed. And instead of stopping, they went even harder, and people see it. And then all of a sudden, we see people like Biden, like Macron, like the rest of them start literally going against their own interests to toe the line. If you don't see the Zionist influence over their agenda, and look, you can pretend that means Jewish people. It does not. But my point is, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It could be a U.S. government influence over the policy of another country, which happens all over the world, and that's crazy. It should be alarming to that country. But what we're seeing now is this Zionist influence over the leadership of these countries to where they are acting against their interest and your interests of the country. And that's why it seems puzzling to some people, because it goes against, but it's obvious when you realize the kind of control we're talking about, or getting into the realm of sexual blackmail and Epstein level stuff, which, let's not forget, even Acosta essentially admitted that Epstein was working with Mossad and CIA, and even on the record admitted to be working with elements of the U.S. intelligence apparatus. So it's obvious that there is some kind of aspect like that. And I think we're seeing how it plays out. Now, let's not forget the numbers we're talking about here. This is just from the 17th. Over 25,000 killed, 52,000 injuries, 89 journalists. I believe it's more than that now. Almost 2 million displaced. It's horrifying. Right now, what we're dealing with is about 146 children a day. 146 children every single day. And if you break down the numbers, guys, here's where we're at. So right now, that's what we're looking at. 74 days it's been going on, give or take 74 days. What right now, just taking the 20,000 number, just 20,000, not 25,000, just 20,000, which again has been stated as the reality by the UN, by Gaza's health ministry. Even the Lancet did a peer-reviewed study to follow up on this and found that they were accurate. And even then, BBC and the Associated Press have made comments about the fact that in the past, the Gaza health ministry, even though it's called out and accused of lying every time by Israel, almost always ends up aligning pretty much to the truth, give or take a little bit. That's their statements, guys. Now, rightly so, you should question whether they're lying, but to disregard it because Israel says is willful ignorance. It's obvious that we're dealing with this level of casualties. Now, 20,000 by itself. That is over 74 days. That amounts to 270 deaths a day. Palestinians. That's 11.25 every hour. That is 5.3 every minute. 5 Palestinians are being killed every minute. 5 Palestinians a minute, guys. That's unbelievable. Now, for comparison, this is the point I want to get into. How many people died in the Iraq War? Now, these are obviously, I'm not pretending we can even prove at this point that these numbers are entirely accurate. But I'm going to take the low end of the numbers and take these as estimates either way. In Iraq, based on these assessments from Wikipedia and so on, they're claiming about 280,000 to somewhere to 315,000. And then just in general, we look at the time frame, okay? So over the process of 8 years, we'll say 280,700 people died. So just taking this math. Now, obviously, they understand the overall point here. We're talking about a longer time frame and a much bigger area, right? So there are differences to include, but all we're really breaking down is the average, right? How many people died every hour, every day, every minute on an average in this process to show you some kind of relative point to make the argument or prove to you that what they're doing right now to a tiny area with one of the most densely civilian populated areas in the world, if not with over 50% under 18, it's obvious. They are committing genocide. It's indiscriminate and it is unparalleled. So in Iraq, the numbers over 8 years, 280,771. That breaks down to 35,000 deaths a year, 2,916 deaths a month, 97 deaths a day, 4 an hour. 4 an hour, right? That's obviously less than 1 a minute. So just giving you and what this ultimately breaks down to, if you look at it, is what is it? So if we're doing 4 an hour and it was 11 an hour, I mean, it's basically 3 times the amount of deaths every hour. So how about Syria? Okay, so Syria, we're talking about, as it says, at least 306,000, almost 307,000 over the process of 10 years, which again, you could argue a lot happened before that, and it's still been happening afterward. They're literally still occupying Syria. But just taking what the base stats are online, okay? That comes down to 30,688 a year. 30,688 a year. It's kind of disgusting how consistent they are with the killing of people in foreign countries, right? 2,557 a month. 85 a day over 10 years, which, by the way, is horrifying. 3.4 an hour, 3.54 an hour. In Syria, the U.S. government and whoever else they worked with, including Israel, by the way, killed 3.54 civilians or people that died in the war, because I think this includes all of it, an hour. Meanwhile, in Gaza, they are killing 5.3 a minute. 5.3 people die every minute in Gaza. Since we've been saying this, 15 people have died. Mostly all civilians. Quite frankly, I have yet to see a single Hamas member proven to be present there. I'm not saying they're not, obviously, but where have they been? We'll show at the end of the show today the civilians they rounded up and were forced to admit were civilians, even though some of them died. They said, yay, a win. We got all the Hamas out of the tunnels. Turns out they were civilians. But it doesn't matter because all the Hasbara propaganda online has already jumped to 14 narratives down the line. Now, Caitlin Johnstone writes this. The entire position of the pro-Israel side of the Gaza debate is hinged on the premise that there is no limit on the number of innocents you can morally kill when pursuing a military objective. From their point of view, not only is it perfectly acceptable that 10,000 children have been killed by Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza, It would be perfectly acceptable if it was 100,000 or 1 million. As far as the Israel supporters' moral framework is concerned, Hamas could have killed 1/10 of the number of Israelis it killed on October 7th, and Israel can kill 10 times the number of children it killed. And Israel's action in Gaza would still be moral. For normal, psychologically healthy people, this position looks deranged. One of the reasons why it's shocking people around the world. Of course, there's a limit on the number of innocent people it's acceptable to kill while pursuing military objectives, especially objectives that could be resolved non-militarily. Or for that matter, guys, how about just regular militarily? The idea that they're not going in on the ground with some strategic military objective to suss out Hamas members, which, by the way, would still kill civilians, likely intentionally, but instead, which, by the way, they claim they're doing to some degree, is just nonstop continual bombing. First of all, before they ever even went in at all, were 30, 40 days of nonstop 24-hour bombing of everywhere in Gaza. It's obvious that this was not about some kind of only Hamas agenda, and everything else now happening backs that up. The settlements and the statements and what they're doing. It's just very, very, very clear. The only exceptions would be situations, she says, in which there is no other option besides either defeating your enemy by any means necessary or facing your own annihilation. Since there is no rational argument that Hamas poses an existential threat to the state of Israel, because, see, the much as they make this argument, she means just like factually. They don't possess the ability to do that. Not saying that they couldn't carry out terror attacks or whatever you want to call what they're doing. And since there were options for responding to October 7th without dropping a single bomb, there is no argument to be made that it's acceptable to kill all these innocent human beings while pursuing the completely unattainable goal of wiping out armed resistance to Israel militarily. On top of the fact that they're clearly protecting the leadership of Hamas in Qatar. I don't know why nobody points that out. Peace could be obtained by negotiating with the Palestinian resistance and achieving a deal that works for everybody. And this is where the reality comes into play. The lies about how they've always refused it, like RFK stupidly said the other day. All the lies they keep pushing, even though you can prove the opposite by Netanyahu's own statements. The idea that they have ensured by funding Hamas or putting poison pills in the deals that they would not work. And if they ever went forward, that they wouldn't accept it because nobody would accept the amount of poison pills he put in it, which is ultimately a statement. Palestinian resistance have been fighting for a two-state solution of their own self-determination, which is ultimately what they mean by from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free. Wherever it is, it'll be free. And yes, some people argue that means giving back all of Palestine to the Palestinians, which legally would be the reality. But nobody sees that as being a viable reality for where we currently are in the world, who's being honest. Because there are innocent people in Israel, obviously. So the point is that you try to find some rational solution, which ultimately does, to a degree, benefit the irrational Israeli government, but it's about the civilians underneath all of this and keeping them safe and finding a solution that stops their suffering. And they have been making this clear for a very long time. Even Hamas's charter says from 2017 forward that they are fighting the Zionist agenda and that they want a peaceful. So you could say they're lying, but at some point you have to acknowledge that the only side of this that's coming at this as we only want what we want and there is no other solution is coming from the Zionist government. Well, you can say that they secretly want this, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but they're not saying that. They're calling for a two-state solution. Israel's saying never, no way, not possible. Like I always told you they have. Now that's on the record. She goes, the uneasy, abusive status quo of October 6th could also be returned to by simply addressing the massive, spectacular failures of Israel's military and intelligence services, which let October 7th happen in the first place. When you weigh these two options against the option of killing 1,000 children a week in a military offensive in Gaza, both of them are self-evidently superior to the eyes of any normal, healthy person. And by the way, on the child aspect, let's not forget, the number is over 10,000 now. Last time I checked, it was 10,091 children alone. So just divide the number in half. So right now, if we're talking 20,000 over 74 days, right now, about what would be almost 3 children a minute die right now. The number we looked at the last week was 146 a day. With the numbers we just did, it breaks down to almost 3 children every minute. That is almost more important to think about because it really reaches the average person. Every minute we talk on the show right now, 3 children are being killed in Gaza. 3. Not Hamas members, children. I just don't see how you can pretend that makes sense. A peaceful resolution isn't possible, she said. It just isn't desired. Oh, excuse me. She says a peaceful resolution isn't impossible. It just isn't desired. It isn't desired because Israel has long sought to further expel Palestinians from their land, which, guys, is on the record. And the war on Hamas provides cover for that goal. The claim that Israel has no choice but to snuff out tens of thousands of lives in the name of fighting Hamas, which they deem defending itself, is patently false. It doesn't need to. It just wants to. Ultimately, their argument is we need to kill all these people because we really, really want to, which is not a valid defense. Or by arguing that they're going to come after and kill all of us, or these kind of binary arguments. We'll realize that even the argument that they're going to keep doing this comes from the leadership from Qatar, who is currently being protected by Israel, not the people in Gaza. You have to see how this is being played. So let's go through. We're about an hour right now. We're looking good. Let's go through some of the lies that are still being perpetuated. Now, I've already broken down most of these the constructs they're using, the lie, right? Like either you support Israel or you want to kill all Jews. Like that's just not real. Somebody may exist in that side, but to pretend that's all that happens is intentionally deceptive. It's meant to scare people. So let's go through some of these points. So coming right off the point we just made, as I had 140 children, 146 a day, 3 a minute. Hold on a sec. I'm just thinking that out. I'm like, make sure that's so. If it's no, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, I'll have to go back on the child numbers and make sure I'm not making a mistake there. I think that doesn't add up. But the ones I have before are, you can break them down yourself. 20,000 for 74 days. It's very obvious. But in any case, maybe I'm just thinking of it wrong right now. The bottom line is we can prove to you that there are an unparalleled amount of people dying, innocent people every single day. 5 a minute is overwhelming. But Dr. Eli David says, Hamas, we demand a ceasefire, claiming Hamas says this, which, by the way, they are. Also, Hamas today, this is on December 19th, mind you. So he's claiming this happened on one day. Let's fire tens of rockets on civilians in Tel Aviv and cities around it and hope to kill and injure as many civilians as possible. Okay, well, first of all, this is the game. This is how absurd this is. They're the ones who recently claimed, which is largely true, that they're firing unguided rockets, which means that that's a war crime because they could end up hitting civilians because they're not aiming. But then when they want to, they pretend that they're aiming at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They just aimed at it. It's like, well, you just said they're not aiming, and that's why it's a crime. They just throw whatever they can at the wall and see what sticks all the time. I mean, this guy will post the same thing multiple times throughout the week and delete the old ones. The same fuzzy image they claim to align with some kind of Nazi thing, and he just over and over the same insulting memes, and it's just very, very coordinated and clumsy. My point is, that's a lie. That's patently false. First of all, I don't see, in regard to the rockets flying, I don't see reports of that at all. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. But to argue that he's claiming this many rockets were fired yesterday, it's just not true. Now, you could argue that he says today, let's fire tens of rockets, and it's also Hamas today, and then post an image that doesn't even relate to that, but that sounds like the kind of BS this guy does all the time. In any case, I said, ignoring for the moment that this is a completely made-up number, which I know you know, let's assume all these were fired today. How many Israelis were killed or even injured? This is an important question. It's not to say that that doesn't matter, as all these weird people below seem to equate, binary equate from what I say. So you're trying to say, no, I'm not. I'm saying exactly what I said right there. But the point is, completely and then I said the point, how many children were killed in Gaza today? Right? Just children, 140. So my point is, you're arguing that this is the reason to not have a ceasefire and to continue doing what you're doing, which equally potentially kills your hostages as well as Palestinians, as well as whatever you claim Hamas is. Because you're claiming rockets were fired that did not hurt anyone. Like, this is the game I've been continuing to play, or that they've been continuing to play, where I point out the Iron Dome discussion, They say they fired a rocket. They say they shot it down. It landed in a field, and then they go on to bomb Gaza for a week. That used to happen all the time. And Times of Israel, Haaretz would write articles about how they would lie about that for political reasons to jump support before an election. That does not mean they don't fire rockets. It means that there is a dynamic where they lie about these things. My point is this is not even comparable. This is what Caitlin's talking about. You're talking about a situation where you're acting like they have the ability to somehow wipe you off the map, and so you're going to do it first. And all you're really doing is creating a dynamic where you justify your genocide. And that's what these people are meant to do. And lying to do it. He says, many Palestinians in the West Bank used to work in Israel. Since October 7th, Israel banned their entrance. Right? Yeah, so you're making our points for us. Palestinians, not Hamas, and they just collectively punish them because they're Palestinians, which is really what this war is about. So thank you, Eli, for making that clear for us. He goes on to say, recent poll shows 82% of Palestinians in the West Bank support October 7th massacre, he says. That's not true. It's just simply not true. One, he already posted this yesterday. That's the day before, which says 75% of Palestinians support Hamas. Weird how in one day that went to 83%. It's just 82. Just whatever, throw it at the wall, whatever works, right? My point is, this is the important point to make. What they support is the act of resistance. And you could listen to what they're telling you. Most of them do not support something that puts their potential self-determination at risk. So when they're cheering or they say, I support what they did, that is a legally protected act. Now, Eli David is never going to engage with this conversation because it makes them look wrong. Because the United Nations and anybody else has always maintained, because of the reality that this is an occupied territory, just like Syria, just like Iraq, Gaza is occupied. Larger Palestine is occupied. Therefore, as the UN has, this is the reason they maintained the reality. The Geneva Conventions protect the act of armed rebellion under international law. It doesn't matter what you think these groups are. They acted under the Palestinian resistance umbrella. When they acted, they were acting under international law, fighting against military targets, which is what their stated goal was, and what most of the evidence backs up. Now, whatever you think that happened, and it's debatable today based on how many and where, because of all the evidence coming out showing IDF were killing people and their lies about what happened, but it's undeniable that Hamas did commit crimes. So when that happened, those people are accountable for crimes. Not all of the action protected under international law. The same way an entire war would not be invalidated by the actions of an individual soldier. Even though, frankly, sometimes it should be. So that's the reality. So when he continues to dishonestly conflate people who support the act of legal and protected armed rebellion with all of the people that were killed, even though many of them were killed by IDF members, which he also won't engage with, it's a lie, guys. Even the percentage he uses from one year to the next will change. He goes, those terrorism supporting people should never be allowed to enter Israel again. Terrorism supporting because they support an act of legal rebellion. As Mario says, 66% of job losses in the West Bank. Right, this is collective punishment. So all he really did was make clear to you that we hate all Palestine, any Palestinians. Now, let me ask you this. Does he know whether that group even exists within the 82% or 73%, depending on what day you talk to Eli, of the people that support the legal act? Right? What about the other 18% that don't? That's called collective punishment, Eli, and you're not smart enough to understand that you just admitted that, right? That's the point. They are actively, collectively punishing all Palestinians because that's the real point of this, on the record. Now, again, the point was, yesterday he said it was 75%. Same lie. All it really says was the attack on October 7th. Right. So the act of invading, which were, by the way, illegal settlements on the outskirts of Israel proper, was protected under international law, no matter how much that upsets people. So yes, Palestinians are saying, yes, obviously, I support our act to our own self-determination. When you actually ask them, if you had a poll that said, do you support the killing of innocent people on October 7th? I'm willing to bet you the vast majority would say no. And that's what they're saying if you listen to them. And of course, you could always ask whether they might be lying, but the point is you just have to take at some level what people are saying and then question afterward. But to do what they're doing, which is they're saying one thing, but here's what they really mean, because what I'm saying is ridiculous. It's propaganda. Now, these next ones are important to show you how they are reveling in the punishment and the terror and destruction and killing of Palestinians. whatever they support. So same thing. How it started, how it's going. They love these ridiculous binary things. And the point is, you have this guy, whoever he is, posting this, Al-Aqsa Flood, which was the name of the effort of the Hamas to go into occupied Palestine, Israel. And what is it showing? Is it showing women being raped or civilians being killed? No, it's showing IDF members getting taken down and tanks being blown up, which, if Eli was smart enough, would realize that's a legally protected act, regardless of how much that upsets you. Now, then, completely unrelated to supporting a legal act over here, he points out where my house is destroyed. My mom has been killed. My father has been killed. My brother and sister are dead. And Eli goes, ha, 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 here's how it's going for them. I guess they shouldn't have been Palestinian. Guys, this is my point. This makes me, like, I have to constantly remember that this is not everybody. In fact, it's not even close to the majority. But it makes me sad that people like this exist. That there are actually people out there that revel in the pain of innocent people because it works for their agenda. You know, there are plenty of them. We've talked about them. But why, I mean, even if you pretend that this is supporting the massacre of civilians, why is it then okay to revel in his suffering? It just makes you a disgusting person, Eli, and that's the reality about this. There's no compassion. And same thing here. Another person saying the event, and it's October 7th, is great and scary, but my God, my happiness is limitless. Where in there does that say I like seeing innocent people be killed? It's the same point. And even if you think that's what she says, this person saying I lost everything is somehow enjoyment for you. That's what this is. You're making fun of how somebody lost everything. Did they lose everything because they're Hamas? No. They lost everything because they're Palestinian under the boot of an Israeli government. That's what he's reveling in. They're honest, guys. They're showing it to you in this one regard. They just can't not reveal how much they hate Palestinians. And of course, there are plenty of Palestinians that hate Israelis unjustly, because not all Israelis are out there to get you. But plenty of them want to see them hurt. Why? Because of the Zionist religious extremist government. Racism exists. People hate people. That's just how the world is sometimes. And yeah, we should do our best to call it out, but people think what they want. That's part of being free. For anybody, regardless of any of that, to make fun of somebody losing everything, it just shows you who they truly are. Same point. And I'm sure this one's been shown many times. These are innocent Palestinian civilians. Yeah, they really are, Eli, even if they're celebrating death. You don't just get to deem somebody not innocent because you don't like what they're celebrating. It shows you what kind of morally ambiguous person you are. But the point is, they're cheering on the 7th, right? I've showed you this many times. When they were doing this, how in the world do you pretend they know what's going on right now in Israel? Because look at what time of the day it is. They don't know what's happening over there. All they know is all they've gotten wind of is that there's an action taken, that people are going in with an armed rebellion act, which, by the way, of course they should celebrate. This is people doing something legally protected, fighting for their independence, or at least that's how they see it. Ask them if they want civilians to be killed. I would argue they would say no, because that doesn't, whether they care about it or not, they know that doesn't align with what they're trying to accomplish. But some of them probably do. But to pretend that's them cheering people being slaughtered and kidnapped makes you an ignorant liar. That's the truth. And this is the kind of binary thinking you're showing, right? Using these same old memes, which in most cases, like, they don't even use them properly, which is embarrassing. It's that meme with the guy sweating with the two buttons. One says, Hitler did a great job. The other says, Israel's a Nazi state. It's just like, it's just so, it's stupid. The obvious implication is that if you don't support Israel, then you like Hitler. And it's just like, God, whoever bought stuff like this? It is just childishly not, it is lowbrow. It's not very intelligent. Is there somebody out there that thinks Hitler did a good job, but also thinks Israel is Nazi state and then sweats? It's like, it's just so ridiculous. Most people who support the Palestinian resistance do not support Hitler. Like, it's not even an overlap. It's really dumb. The only group that makes that allegation are the Zionist entities who have manipulated Jews into thinking anybody against the Israeli government somehow secretly hates Jewish people. It doesn't even logically make sense. Now, somebody could be in that field and they could end up hating Israel because they hate Jews. That might make sense, but not the other way around. It's just very, very clear that they're desperate to keep you thinking that. Now, Elon Levy, the Israeli government spokesperson for specifically the Seventh War, which I bet you his position goes on forever. He said, and this is the UN human rights group saying, Gaza calls for a ceasefire on human rights and humanitarian grounds are getting louder by the day and must be heeded. There is simply nowhere left in Gaza to go. Nowhere. He's here, nowhere. He's saying not in the protected areas because you know why? They're bombing them as we keep proving to you. They're bombing where they are. They're bombing where they're told to go. They're bombing them on the way. This was proven in the fake ceasefire when they literally went through. Even CNN taught this stuff out. Here's what he says. Have you tried encouraging people to go to the humanitarian zone instead of funneling them into Hamas strongholds? Wow. Now, guys, I've said it many times. I'm not defending the UN. This is not even about the UN. This is, look, literally this person either has no idea what his government's actually doing and he's just completely ignorant of the situation, which I find hard to believe, or he is knowing that they're bombing civilians when they go where they're supposed to and then says that. Think about the kind of sociopathic mindset, literally borderline psychopathy, to make the argument to almost, this is almost, it's vindictive. It's sinister. You are literally, you're making fun of them, knowing that they're doing that, knowing that they're going to where you tell them to go, and then you're killing them anyway. And then almost like in some kind of sarcastic tone going like, well, have you told them to go to the safe hole, the stronghold, or the humanitarian zones? His point was there are no safe places, nowhere. And it says instead of funneling them into Hamas and propping them up as human shield strategy. Wow. It's just that. Remember when I told you at the beginning that nobody anywhere was claiming UN locations were Hamas? And then eventually they just started saying that because it was so obvious. I think over 130 people in UN members have been killed. And there's no evidence whatsoever to what he's saying. Add this real quick. Since I didn't see, I want to make sure that gets pointed out to people. The human shields point, which I won't play again, but then he goes on to say, have you tried condemning Hamas for shooting missiles at our cities from the safe zone where they're meant to be protected? Actually, they're rockets and they're unguided, as you well know, you liar. But also the fact that how do you know that they're firing from these areas? You've proven nothing. Protected zones. I mean, it's painful how many lies are being put forward. Now, overall, there is no safe location per Doctors Without Borders, even per BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and all they do is just go, you're a liar. Now, maybe consider it. All right. Listen, go, maybe. Okay. He called them liars. Let's go find out. And you go and look and you can see that they're bombing on the street, bombing at the locations they're going to, bombing the Rafah crossing, which Egypt has said. So what logical person is going to look at all the facts and say, I'm just going to go with what Elon said, as opposed to everything else we can prove, including from the corporate media? Now, Hen Mazig, whatever you say, is not another one of these guys. He says, meanwhile, and all of this is a chant in, I think, New York City of people wearing Palestinian garb saying ceasefire. So they're calling for a ceasefire, which again, this whole point is all they're calling for is an end of military engagement. Why would the response be, tell Hamas to stop doing X, Y, and Z? It's ceasefire is for everybody. Nobody stops. They all stop firing. And by the way, one of the things they've been pushing for with the ceasefire, which was voted in by the UN, all hostages exchanged. All of them. They've all voted for it. Hamas has been offering it since the first week. That was proven already by even corporate media. Even Netanyahu was forced to admit it. Now they went back, acting like we're not sure. It's Hamas that doesn't want it. They've always wanted it. It's been clear from the first week. They've already voted for it. The U.S. vetoed it the first time, and then U.S. and Israel voted no on exchanging all the hostages. And then they stand up and act like Hamas won't let us. Guys, if you're in Israel and you have family there, they're willfully disregarding their safety. Not only are they voting to not let them come home, they're continuing to allow military engagement right over their heads, while people who have come home are telling you that that's what they were scared of most. Now, they're calling for ceasefire. He goes, meanwhile, Hamas is holding an 11-month-old baby, which, quite frankly, I find hard to believe. Certainly possible. I'm not, that my point from before is that, yes, they did take civilians. That's a crime, no matter how you split it. Doesn't matter how much more crime was committed on the other side, it was still a crime to take civilians. It was still a crime to kill civilians. But even that point right there, I'm beginning to see so much evidence that ultimately I would need to see that being proven to me right now to be able to argue that I know for sure it wasn't the IDF. But in no way am I disputing Hamas would not kill civilians, or saying that they wouldn't kill civilians. They would. But he then goes on to say babies burned in ovens. That's an obvious lie. Even Haaretz proved that was a lie. Decapitated them and shot them in their cribs. That's been proven to be a lie. And cut from those wombs, also been shown to be a lie. There's just how lost they are in this lie, guys. They don't have anything else. They're just continuing to repeat the same lies. You can read this directly from Haaretz. You can read this from people that have said it. Owen Jones, who went to the screening that's supposed to prove all of this stuff from The Guardian, said that none of this was proven there. You can watch it for yourself. It's right here. This guy recapping it, all of them. He said there is no proof of any of the things they're saying or proof. And he called 2 other journalists who were there, and they both said the same thing. Yeah, we didn't see that proof. Despite the fact that there are people coming out of that, Israel's chosen elements, saying, I saw everything and everything was proven. They're lying, guys. They are lying. I am not mincing words. That's a lie. Read this article for yourself. The Hamas massacre led to the spread of horror stories, not all of which were true. Where is it? Oh, that's right. I have to scroll. It has to change. I'm going to go down. Yes, he has to update. I just want to show you really quickly what was it? Is it that one? Oh, no, it's the one about the stomach right here. And this is the same guy. This same guy continues from the Zaka group, one of these groups that's supposed to be working with. And yeah, that's what he says right there. She was a pregnant woman with her stomach butchered. Right there. Stories and descriptions that are not true. And there's the one down here is right there. This is under this one right here of the woman and this discussion. And the bottom line is they found their own investigation that none of these were true. Baking in an oven, burned to death, both the things that he said. But this story is also not true. The point is everything they're discussing here is not true. The idea of the pregnant woman being cut out of her stomach, all these things are lies. And it doesn't mean that they didn't kill people. But ask yourself why they would need to lie about these, because the atrocity propaganda was meant to cover what they knew was going to be massive death of 5 children, 5 people a minute in Gaza. He's lying. He knows he's lying. That's what I believe. Okay, then we have Elon Levy again making an allegation. And this is Amnesty simply calling for a ceasefire. Amnesty International says, we're calling for a ceasefire now, which is benign. It means everybody stops, right? But they've contorted ceasefire, even peace, into somehow meaning we hate Jews. It's pathetic. It's obvious. He says, how fitting that Amnesty is demanding an amnesty for Hamas rapists. You know, even though there is no evidence that or real proof that rape was committed. And we've continued to make that clear. It's not a comfortable conversation, but it is the reality. And that's what Owen Jones and the rest of there is no proof that it was committed. Even the allegations they're putting forward have been shown to have no forensic evidence per their own investigation team, which means no matter what the allegation is, it'll never be proven in a court of law. So right there, you can clearly argue it has not been proven. And then one of the most obvious claims they keep repeating is that the pelvis bone was, I've proven based on experts, the amount of pressure it takes to break a pelvis bone is simply not possible by a human being exerting pressure. It's not. So they're lying. That makes me wonder what did do it then. What kind of after the fact effort made that happen so that could be claimed? Because that seems to be a report from the morgue. I'll include this, just the art, the show itself, where we go over the image that we've discussed, the image that this provably from 2022, caught using an old image that they then removed. And many of them, even Levy, the woman conducting the main investigation, already presented that fake image in her presentation. So at the very least, we know to some level these are lies, and they may not even know that. But he says that amnesty is demanding amnesty. Well, I said, apparently you don't understand the word amnesty or ceasefire. You know why? Amnesty, you know what it means? It means pardon, reprieve, release, discharge. Okay. Where are they calling for a pardon? Remind me, Elon. It says ceasefire, occupied territories. Okay. Yeah, they didn't, is the point. So why is it? Think about the level of dishonesty it takes to just lie in real time when anybody with a brain can see that. What he's trying to do, because it's desperate, it's absolute desperation, trying to conflate ceasefire with giving Hamas something. Because that's kind of what they're saying. A ceasefire is a Hamas Freedom Day or whatever the nonsense they're putting forward. But now they've went all the way over to say, well, they're giving them a pardon if they cease murdering children in Gaza, is pardon for them. They have lost control of this narrative. Dan Cohen also includes, I have 3 things new actually to show you. Oh, I think we've shown you this one already, but the point is new footage. No, this is new. The new footage that now proves or adds to the proof we've already shown you that they fired tanks at their homes in Kibbutz Be'eri, which we already know. It's a 32-second clip. We already know this. It's like Stranger Things sound. These tanks fired on homes, as even the IDF tank drivers admitted. That both the tanks were fired, but they also got out and fired their guns at the homes. And they said, are there civilians in there? And the person said, we don't know, fire anyway. This is all proof. This has been proven by Haaretz. The helicopter pilots also shot them, as they said themselves. As he says, Yasmin Porat testified that the tank shelling of a house where 14 Israelis and 39 Hamas fighters were killed happened after sundown. This shelling in this video occurs in the daytime. So it's evidence that Israeli tanks hit another house in the Be'eri. This is the Hannibal Directive, guys. They were killing their own people. This is not debatable. It's not even, you can't dismiss this anymore. You could, from the very beginning, you could dismiss it. It was proven. The security head of the Kibbutz Be'eri himself admitted they shot people. This one is fresh testimony revealing how the captives in Kibbutz Be'eri were fired on. This is Hadass Dagan, who is a sole survivor from that house he just described, who has now said on the record she watched them kill people who weren't Hamas. Now, Wyatt Reed shares this one. It says, quote, suddenly you see an Israeli warplane firing a rocket inside the kibbutz, right? So now we have people. This is another person admitting that a plane fired a missile in the area, helicopter pilots firing on the homes. We have tank shells. Gee, sounds like they were really just going for an absolute complete killing of everything that was there, doesn't it? You can see it right there. Suddenly you see an Israeli plane firing a missile inside the kibbutz. It's in Hebrew. You can watch it for yourself. Israeli soldier describes the scenes you cannot comprehend. That's his words. Let's not forget, by the way, I brought this up during our pirate stream, and it's nothing that it's not necessarily, it's something that is another data point, but I just want to point out how interesting this still is. And Robin Minotti pointed this out. This is just another kind of an academic going over this research. And it's all stuff you can prove. This is from the October 7th discussion, and what you can find in here, as we've shown you before. He talks about the blue shirts. To me, it's more important that you see clearly Israeli elements speaking in Hebrew who are moving around with Hamas on the 7th. Shouldn't that matter? Now, his point is that it seems they all wear some variation of a blue shirt. Maybe that was the point. Maybe they were meant to be identified by Hamas. Maybe this is an indication that there was more of a coordination, an actual MyHop situation. Made it happen on purpose. In fact, the funding and the coordination, I mean, who knows? But I think it's very obvious it is not what we're being told. And if you haven't seen it, they've revised the numbers down even more from October 7th. Which doesn't mean we should dismiss. The point is that it's from 1,400 to 1,200 now down to 1,193 or 1,139. And even that, though, is the bigger point. That the information coming from their own Social Security department is 695 civilians. 36 children were killed. 373 security forces. 71 foreigners for a total of 1,139. Remember those 200 numbers with a bunch of those Hamas members they burned alive in those homes next to civilians. That's why they weren't able to tell the difference. Then revised it down to 1,200. Now the point really, though, is that 695 civilians, which right now there are still people. I think Piers Morgan just claimed it was 1,500 civilians just recently in an interview of October 7th. That's not true. Their numbers show 695, but my point is, based on the Cradle and different reports, we've already shown that there's more than just, like they say, security forces. How many of them were settlers? How many of them were reservists? All of these matter in the kind of dynamic we're talking about, which make them military targets. That, I guarantee you, is lower. But even that, coming from 1,400 civilians, which was reported, down to 695, all these lives matter, guys. No one's claiming this doesn't matter or it makes it inconsequential. But it does prove to you that we've been lied to from the very beginning. Now, let's talk about the Azov overlap, which is super important. Or at the very least, a Ukrainian overlap, but I'm going to show you why I think this is very clear. Now, Freddie Pontone's already broke this down in regard to the United States being present. Specifically United States elements, but also them there with, it says U.S. mercenaries from Ukraine. So you could talk about this being U.S. elements, or it could be their elements along with leadership from Ukraine. The point is that you can see U.S. presence on the ground very clearly. And he goes over this in depth, and you can read it for yourself. And in case you want to dismiss that, it's really very obvious. This is from October 12th of this year. Israeli-American volunteers to help soldiers in Israel. That's my point from earlier. Are they volunteers or are they just mercenaries? Right? And why is it legal for an American to go fight in a foreign military, whether that be Ukraine or Israel? Most countries don't allow that. It's very strange. But there's more than one example. This is from December 30th from 2015. So just showing you that this has been happening more than just this last engagement. I'm an American Jew. Here's what happened when I joined the Israeli military. Very strange. Then in general, this is from the 2017 discussion, Israel's volunteer soldiers. Just showing you that this is not a new concept. So whether you want to use the term mercenary or not, yes, the Israeli military does in fact accept outside elements. That one name for that would be mercenary. Now here is what Talha Ahmed, which I believe actually came from this guy first. I think so. Murad Quatley was a journalist as well. But this is what we're discussing. He says, we now have visual confirmation from his news story of foreign mercenaries fighting alongside the IDF in Gaza. He reported this back on November 19th with just a statement saying a credible source told him that hundreds of mercenaries arrived in Israel last week. This was on November 19th, mostly French, German, and Italian. Now, I have seen statements of all sorts of different numbers from all around the world. I wasn't able to confirm it, so I didn't include it. But it says this week, many were given honorary citizenships, which, by the way, see, that's my point, is that they're not even Israeli-American, Israeli. They're just people from other countries, other militaries, where they just give them honorary citizenship. Now, it says, according to Ynet, the IDF released thousands of reservists from active duty in recent days without making an official statement. That's interesting. But coming forward another month, he says he's now confirmed with visual confirmation. A Ukrainian mercenary writes in Ukrainian to his mother that he is in Gaza. Companies from Belgium and Italy are providing most of the mercenaries. That's what this says here. I was able to confirm that. That's mother right there. I think that might be Ukraine. I forget what, and that is the symbol we've all become accustomed to with the Azov movement in Ukraine. And he adds to that. Oh, actually, I think I'll come back to that for the next one. So before we go further on that, the Azov movement part of this, or rather just Ukraine overlap, I want to make something clear. This is not something to be dismissed. The Israeli government has actively, from the very beginning of its inception to the Syrian war and forward, worked alongside the very same elements that it's currently accusing Hamas of being. The Al-Qaeda, ISIS overlap, as well as the literal Nazi party going back to its origins. And I'll prove that to you right now. So as the squirrel points out, the genocidal Israeli occupation played a key role in destroying Syria, funneling weapons and funds to ISIS, who were also treated in Israeli hospitals, which we all know that's a real story. Now, and they've even admitted to it, right? Even in, I think it was a MSNBC interview where he was asked pointedly about it. And he said, well, you have to have compassion for your enemies. And he said, what about Hezbollah? And he said, no, not them. Called him out to being a hypocrite. The point was he admitted on the record that they did in fact treat ISIS. That's a fact. That was the Mossad chief, I believe, who said that on the record with MSNBC. But it says now Zionists are pointing to the death and destruction that they caused in Syria as evidence they're being humane in Gaza. Right? So the point being, like, arguing that the death and destruction, it was the numbers I was pointing to from Syria and everything else, and compare it. But the point is, when you compare the actual average, it's shockingly higher right now. But this is the point. Israel gives secret aid to Syrian rebels, which we now know weren't rebels, but we're not moderate rebels, but we're ISIS, Al-Qaeda. The same exact thing we were told they were fighting. Israel is tending to the wounded Syrian rebels. Israel reportedly provided direct aid funding to the Syrian rebels. We're talking about Al-Nusra Front, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That's what these are. These are very, very, very dangerous people. As Jeffrey Sachs says, the collapse of Syria was brought on by the CIA. They literally did an operation to destroy Syria. And guess who was a core part of that campaign? The neocon warhawk Israel lobby. Because now you have depraved scumbag Zionists like Simon Shama, beloved by liberals, pointing to Syria and the death and destruction the U.S., NATO, Israel empire caused there and going, well, we're not that bad. We're saints by comparison, even though that's not actually true. Not when you break down the numbers. Now, again, the point is, if you went on for 10 years, can you even imagine what would be happening here? But there's only 2.5 million people here in Gaza. But it says the U.S. is occupying parts of Syria now, stealing their oil and other resources. Israel's bombing Syria every day, often. They have been bombing it for over a decade. These depraved people have no shame. This lying is like drinking water to them. The point, and they go over the same numbers here, is the reality that they're more than willing to work with, arm, and cooperate, or same point, work with, cooperate, ISIS. The very thing they're currently calling Hamas, even though they are adversarial, very openly. Largely, I think, because whatever the resistance has become is very aware of Israel's influence over these other entities. Now, if you don't believe that and understand the origins of what these things are, I highly recommend you watch. Well, this is the watch along we did from part 1, 2, and 3 of James Corbett's amazing documentary, The Secret History of Al-Qaeda. All the links for the actual just documentaries themselves are in there, but please make sure you watch these if you don't believe this, because it is undeniably obvious that the U.S. and Israel very much so created and continue to work with these elements. And here's that clip again. I'll play it for you. The ex-chief of Israel, Shin Bet, so basically their FBI, drew attention to the fact that he believes their strategy to deliberately cause humanitarian crises in Gaza for their own objective bears a striking resemblance to ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
I am not psychologist. I'm not sure I totally understand, but I think that one of the scenarios, we have too many, chaos agents in Israel. I hear in the television. Some of them used to be my friends, and they explain me and us and all of us that our goal, not military, our political goal should be to create a human disaster in Gaza.
Just so it's clear, he's admitting to what he understands while he was in charge. It's amazing how much evidence we have to what they really want to accomplish. And all we do is listen to leadership who are clearly compromised. What they want is right in front of you. Listen to the former head of Shin Bet telling you that they want and have planned, their objective is to create what they claim is a byproduct of fighting against Hamas right now.
Should be to create a human disaster in Gaza. Because from the chaos, we shall start again. And I can tell you, Aaron, that this is exactly the theory of the most radical, fundamental Muslim organizations.
And why is that? Well, because they're all funded by the US and Israel, and that's not even a joke. They have actively funded the most radical elements of what they claim they're fighting for decades. Hamas being one of them, as we've proven. And the obvious reason is because the people that are less extreme were not willing to bend over for their interests, for the interest of the US and Israeli governments at the expense of their countries. So they fund the people that will take them out. And then when those people cause more problems, well, it's all the better for them to continue their agenda overseas. Meanwhile, people are being murdered and killed, and they're the ones that created it. In fact, funded, used them. It's been history. It's one of the most obvious open secrets throughout history.
This is exactly the theology and the strategy of ISIS and of Al-Qaeda. From the chaos, we shall survive.
Or another way to frame it would be order out of chaos. What do you know? Now, back to the point about the Ukrainian overlap. So we have a member of the IDF in a school, which is what I'll show you it is, in Gaza, who wrote on the board his allegiance or alignment with Ukraine and the Azov movement. So this person says, well, sorry to burst your bubble, the IDF doesn't use mercenaries. That's why I brought that up before. Well, okay. Seeing as how we can prove that there are U.S. elements, are they part of the IDF now? Or are they working alongside them? And if they are, well, there's plenty of words you can call that. Allies, contracted, mercenaries. It's just about how you frame it. Counterterrorism, terrorism. Even though they're identical, it's funny how we call them different things. Right? That's the game, right? These are elements working with the other outside of the Israeli military. Many of them are being paid to do so. So it's pretty obvious what's going on, but they just don't like the framing. He says, this is an Israeli soldier from Ukraine who's either Jewish or from, I mean, how in the world does he know that? That's what he wants the truth to be, because on feeling like this is some kind of knock on Israel is suddenly draws out all the Zionist defenders. But the point is obvious here. Oh, and then first of all, I think this is where it originated from. He's saying yesterday, this person published a picture of the soldier literally writing this, and it's obviously in a school. I'll just show it to you right now. All right. I just love destroying all these schools for no reason. The tanks just sitting out in front of the schools. Isn't that nice? Ridiculous. So here's why this is important. Now, first of all, as I showed you before, this is not new. The Israeli government have been funding, and this is for the podcast directly from Haaretz. Israeli rights groups, human rights activists in Israel, demand Israel stop arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's their terminology. So it's amazing that we can pretend that they're not that when Israelis accuse the Israeli government of arming neo-Nazis when they pointed at the Azov movement, because obviously that's what they were. That's what they are. And again, it says they argue that these weapons serve forces that openly espouse a neo-Nazi ideology and cite evidence that the Azov movement are part of our Ukraine forces, obviously. You know why? Because the Israeli government's been involved with that creation since 2014, since the beginning of that post-revolution or color revolution state of the country. The reality is it was completely driven by the CIA and their apparatus in general, including the Israeli government. Before we get there, this is from 2023. Israeli government welcomes Azov battalion leader as an honored guest. Isn't that strange? Right in the beginning of the year? Moscow, of course, from Russia's perspective, Israeli mercenaries fighting with far-right Ukrainian unit. Well, it's not just from Moscow. It's a fact. It's open discussion. We proved this, that there are Israeli elements that are on the ground. I showed you videos of it. So it's funny that they go, that's not true. But here's what's even more funny about this. This is 2022, right? So they're just trying to deny that they're openly working with the group that they were openly funding in 2018. Yeah, what a strange thing, right? But here's the point. I-24, huge corporate media in Israel. Ukrainian volunteers or mercenaries, however you want to look at it. Well, I guess the argument is mercenaries are paid, but I highly doubt these are people that are volunteering of their own volition. These are people that are working in the Israeli-funded elements in Ukraine that are now being shifted over here, just like the Syrian rebels when they got shifted elsewhere, or from Turkey over to Syria. The same way this is always used. It's not new. But it says, this is from this December 6th, this year, Israeli volunteers come to Israel to return the favor. Oh, okay, so Moscow wasn't lying then. So they're returning the favor that you said wasn't happening back then. Isn't that funny? Shouldn't be. It should be ridiculous and alarming. These people are lying about everything all the time, and people still go along with what they say. The point is, you could prove we now have Ukrainian mercenaries, soldiers in Israel, in Gaza, fighting on behalf of Israel. And here he is writing stuff about the Ukrainian elements on the board. I mean, it's just very interesting, the overlap to me. Now, this is why it's most interesting overall. Whitney wrote about the new Al-Qaeda, 2022. I've been talking about this a long time. Ukraine and the new Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda being the same kind of element, right, that we know was used, like we just showed you, to drive people into believing that we were under some kind of attack on our freedom, even though it was being funded. You can go all the way back to the Afghanistan discussion, right? The Mujahideen and the use against the Soviet Union. And you watch Charlie Wilson's War if you want the fluffy fake version of the reality, but it still gives you some level of understanding that they were funding bad elements with the interest of going against Russia and then just walked away. Or the reality being that they continued to fund them and they kept them as an element they continued to use. They destabilized the area and stole resources. And then, of course, they pretended to go after them later. And we're going to fight the Taliban, even though that group is still there and still in power, richer than ever, with all sorts of U.S. backing. That's always how this works. Now, the point is, Ukraine was a new element, right? We've talked about the post-revolution Maidan Square discussion, the reality that they were there, they achieved that, they were the ones that were shooting the snipers backed by the West were firing on people that they blamed on Ukraine. I could play the video again, but it's not in the interest of time. I'll leave it for another day. For those that don't believe this, they're probably not believing anything else anyway. And they created this, the Azov movement discussion, which goes way back before this. As I wrote in this discussion, not just Azov, CIA documents prove, Project Aerodynamic is what it's called, that the CIA has been cultivating fascism in Ukraine since at least 1948, with the support of Israel post the Israeli creation. Right? I don't know exactly what date you can argue that the Zionist entity began involving themselves in these agendas. Maybe right in the beginning. I don't know. But you can prove that at some level, as we can, at least 2018 forward, we're funding the same elements. This is the same thing. The Azov movement was created with this. It's the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists that was tapped, used with Mykola Lebed, who was an actual Nazi war criminal that the CIA brought from Poland and set him up in New York City with an actual company that was a media company. They let a Nazi influence Americans with media and set him up in the same group, Prologue Group, I believe it was called, in Ukraine. And since then have been cultivating fascism. We know, and this is what the Azov movement became. And we know that Israel was funding them too. And this is what the new Al-Qaeda was going to become, a way to use this element to create the same kind of dynamic, to mire Russia like they're doing in Ukraine, and to ultimately use this to create their new war on terror, the war on you, the domestic war on terror. And we also know that this is where it brings back the Donald Trump overlap, right? January 6th, as I wrote, the false flag meant to blame Russia and you using the CIA-grown Azov battalion. The CIA and Israeli-funded Azov battalion or movement. Right. So this all continues to overlap. This was an element like the new Al-Qaeda meant to use against the American population. And the false flag effort in January 6th didn't work. But again, remember, there were elements of the Azov movement that were there. Here he is next to Chansley. His name is Sergei Dubinin. He is a member of the Azov movement. He is a Ukrainian. And he was there on the record. All the links are down below, screaming things in Russian. Screaming, "Let's go," in Russian. Why? Because the whole point was to blame Russia for the insurrection that didn't happen and blame them for radicalizing the elements in Ukraine. All of this blew up in their face. Now, they're still utilizing this. This is my opinion, obviously, but I believe I backed this up with the facts. And so now, when we can see the elements of what's going on in Gaza and now see the Ukrainian elements going over into Gaza, all it is confirming the bigger picture for you here. And this is where it gets even more concerning for me. Oh, actually, I forgot I was going to say this too. I think it's right here. Right. there. I want to play the biolab point, but let's not forget, by the way, and I think this is a really interesting overlap. The whole weird loomer part of this all of a sudden, right? People like Alex Bernenson has been even breaking this story long before I even talked about it. Right. But we got into this story. We've been breaking this down, breaking new aspects of this long before January 6th. The reality of, as she writes, Ukrainian Nazis working with the CIA, right? Doesn't even get into the origins of the conversation, right? Project Aerodynamic. You know why? You know why she doesn't touch on any of that? Because she's a raging Zionist. She does not mention Israel's overlap in this. She does not mention their influence in the conversation. She does not discuss the fact that they're arming neo-Nazis. Gee, I wonder why. And that, my friends, is why I believe she pretended to suddenly break this story right before this. I believe that. Because the whole point was to hide the major element of the Israeli involvement of what's going on in Ukraine, because it has a larger tie to bigger things going on. She made this very flimsy and simple. Some of this is true, but it's a very right-wing, pro-Trump, pro-Israel omission of every part of the story, which, by the way, are most of the important parts. But that's what she does, guys. You know my opinion of this ridiculous person. And then I'll include this, by the way, which was her resounding failure of a debate, largely because of this guy who doesn't know how to moderate a debate and wanted to be a part of it and make friends with everybody, but that Dave Smith just utterly destroyed her from the first 2 minutes. That's what I wrote right when it started. Loomer has already lost, and it was embarrassing. So watch it if you'd like. I was going to break this down, and I ended up getting busy and didn't do it. But back to the point about Ukraine. So the reason I think that she and other people were put to almost recreating the break of the story to hide and omit the main parts of the Israeli overlap to this is because I, again, and I've said this many times lately, am convinced that this is going to culminate in something alarming. I hope I'm wrong. I'm not trying to fearmonger. I just see how these things intersect, and it does concern me. So now that we have the obvious connection, and you guys see the stamp right there from Ukraine, the obvious connection of the Israeli funding and influence. And again, don't forget the point I said before. Zelensky, who they claim, the Jewish leader of Ukraine, that's why he can't be funding Nazis, which is ridiculous. There were clearly Nazi collaborators that were Jewish during World War II. But the point is that he was funded by Kolomoisky, who ran the 1+1 media station, right? Who was head of the World Jewish Congress, who was also the leading funder of the Azov movement. Right there, it shows you how hypocritically ridiculous that is. But the 1+1 media station quite literally became Zelensky's cabinet. How often do you have a news group become your cabinet? Usually they're politicians, right? No, but when you're doing a wag the dog type scenario, doesn't mean people aren't dying, but it means they're lying to you about what the reality is. That seems to make sense. But the Israel funding in that, the involvement of creating this narrative begins to overlap with larger discussions when you can see, one, that they're using in other locations of war, but also that we know that there was a very alarming overlap with Biden, Hunter, and biolabs and different overlaps with bio research in Ukraine being funded by elements being controlled and funded by Israel and the United States. What is that going to amount to? I've got to be honest, that's a very disconcerting reality, especially when you see it converging with exactly what I'm talking about. The MAGA, right-wing, vanilla ISIS kind of overlap to something that is being used as a kind of dividing insurrection point for a possible biolab overlap. Throw in some cyber attack and you've got yourself a trifecta.
In particular, the investment fund Rosemont Seneca, which is headed by Hunter Biden.
Rosemont Seneca Partners is the firm tied to Hunter Biden, the U.S. president's son. And the Russian Defense Ministry is listing financial entities that are involved in these biolabs in Ukraine. Now, they also listed George Soros's Open Society Institute and Open Society Foundations, which are also involved with them, and as well as the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, and the U.S. Department of Threat Reduction. All of them seem to be tied in with these biolabs. And it appears that that Rosemont Seneca Partners, the reason that they would be involved is because they have a relationship with Metabiota and Black & Veatch, which are main suppliers of Pentagon biolab materials. Now, Moscow is also coming forward and saying that it appears these biolabs are connected with institutions and research organizations that are related to nuclear missiles. This is what was said.
So that gets even more concerning when you consider the possibility that we're talking about something that could be launched, which would appear to be regular warfare, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be a nuclear missile, right? It could just be something that is used in the process of right now, where there's a lot of rockets and missiles flying, when all of a sudden, you wouldn't even know. Like, we're already being told we're on the verge of lots of illness and outbreak. Just something to consider.
The scale of the program is impressive. In addition to the military, the U.S. Agencies for International Development, the George Soros Foundation, and the Center for Disease Prevention Control are directly involved in its implementation. Scientific supervision is carried out by leading research organizations, including the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which developed nuclear weapons as part of the Manhattan Project. All these activities are carried out under the full control of the Pentagon.
Now, the over 30 biolabs are accused by Russia of being involved in weapons development and trying to develop biological weapons. Now, the USA denies this and insists they are simply research facilities.
Which it's the same thing. That's the same thing Israel's doing with their flimsy efforts to conflate things. It's mercenary and it's contractor. It's the same stupid thing. A research facility has every ability to make weapons as any, like, in the sense of what we know these facilities are capable of, right? Like, maybe not necessarily like the technical know-how in making the weapon itself, but I argue they already have that. The point is that you're able to make, like, in the process of what they call research, that's the dual use dynamic. What they do is make something that's weaponized in order to know how it can be stopped, and they claim that's research. So you have to be able to weaponize it to do that. And you listen to them explain it themselves. It's an illusion. They're making weapons and then maybe making some sort of counter or antidote and claiming that's all about research for bad guys, in the 1 in a bazillion chance that somebody makes the exact same thing somewhere else in the world that they don't know you're making. It's absurd. They're making weapons, and they know they're making weapons.
And we did hear acknowledgement of these facilities' existence from U.S. Undersecretary Victoria Nuland.
Ukraine has biological research facilities. We are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
Right, because they can be used as a weapon. Right. So if all it is a research material that, should the bad guys get it, it becomes a weapon, well, then all you're saying is that's not a weapon because they're not bad guys. I disagree. See, it's all framing. It's all perspective. They know what they're doing, guys. Now, in regard to the ISIS overlap, the Al-Qaeda overlap, or the idea that we're literally talking about neo-Nazi elements in the Ukrainian military, like, the question is, rather, I guess the statement from a lot of people would be that just doesn't make sense. There's no way that the only Jewish state in the world, we're not really talking about that. We're talking about the Zionist government that's using Judaism to manipulate people into thinking that's what they are. If you really listen to what they're doing, their own documentation, or listen to Orthodox Jews around the world that will tell you that. As I understand it, there's over 200 synagogues that they have stood up and said that they do not agree that Zionist Israel is the state of the Jews. And plenty of people that Torah Judaism will tell you that every day in Israel, and get beat up by the IDF for doing so as Orthodox Jews. But the other important part is to not forget Ezra Yachin was this guy who was shown as the oldest living reservist. Remember that? 95 years old. Well, he was a member of the Lehi Party, the Zionist terrorist group that twice attempted to align itself with Nazi Germany. You can look this up on Wikipedia. It's a very real thing. Not because Wikipedia says it, but because it is. And sought to found a copycat fascist state. On January 11, 1941, Vice Admiral Raf von der Marwitz, the German naval attaché in Turkey, filed a report conveying the offer by the Lehi Party to actively take part in the war on Germany's side, in return for Germany's support for the establishment of a historic Jewish state on the national and totalitarian basis, bound by a treaty with the German Reich. It's easily proven. This is the Zionist Party, guys. That's the origins of the Jewish state. How does that make sense? He says the Lehi continued to seek an ally with Germany even after the final solution had begun. Here's Haaretz. Zionist militias' efforts to recruit Nazis in a fight against the British are revealed. Oops. So how is it that the origin of this party, which is why I think they were first hoping you did. I mean, I think right now the conflation of the two is an effort to hide its origins, really. Zionism is not Judaism. I mean, it's a political party. Oh, and and then if there was another, I didn't include it, but there's a lot of evidence around this fact. I mean, I don't think you would probably need more than Haaretz article to say this, but how does this make sense to anybody? The Irgun and Lehi origins of the Zionist elements are they're terrorists. In fact, they called themselves terrorists at the time. That's what they called themselves. And yet we dispute this stuff. In fact, if I even say this in the wrong circle, I'll be called racist, even though you can prove it. Isn't that interesting? Well, here's a little bit too on the nose for you to finish this segment. This person, who is a lawyer, says a masterpiece by people of Israel. Watch this. Now, what this is a play on Inglourious Bastards, where he carves the Nazi symbol into the forehead of a Jew. And they show how the bulldozers made a Star of David on top of a destroyed refugee camp. Now, you tell me this is not exactly what we're talking about. And cheering it on, in fact. And what you can see there is Netanyahu's face superimposed on one of the characters. And then I think, you tell me who that other one is. I'm not sure if that's somebody, I think it's one of the other Israeli members of the Israeli government.
What's up, you rich? I think this just might be my masterpiece.
My God. So it starts showing the Star of David with tanks surrounding it, which they literally rolled it. Like this was a statement of genocide. It's very clear. They're destroying people's homes, and this is making a statement. And then they superimpose Netanyahu's face, Israeli government's face, on somebody who in the movie is carving a Nazi symbol into the Jew's forehead. Right? No, I'm sorry. I've taken it backwards. It's a Nazi's forehead. It's the same point. I just had the dynamic backwards. So these were the Jewish soldiers fighting for the U.S. who were carving the Nazi symbol into the forehead of the Nazi person. So the point is either way. The fact that they're framing this as, and they're doing this to Palestinians. The idea that they're even conflating this with Nazism when you're fighting what they're telling you is an Islamic element, even though they're the ones that have funded and driven them into reality, and saying at one point they're ISIS, but over here they're Nazis, literally, while you can show that the party that they were, or the origin of what they are, were trying to align themselves with Nazi Germany, who then went on to fund neo-Nazis in Ukraine who are currently fighting with them in this war. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so ridiculous. And I think, revealing, quite frankly. Now, to finish, I think these are some important points to include here. I was talking about the reflex or the reactive propaganda we've been seeing, right? It's very reactive. And this is one of those examples. This is from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor. Urgent international investigation needed to probe Israeli war crimes after Palestinian civilians buried alive. I talked about this briefly at the end of the last show, at Gaza's Kamal Adwan Hospital. So, by the way, this is the same time when, and by the way, this is the Euromed Human Rights Monitor based out of Geneva, who is speaking with the doctors in this hospital and just reporting what they're saying they're seeing. Then at the same time, some of these Zionist propagandists put out an image of an Egyptian bulldozer rolling over tents. And then that became they've lying and they played a fake. So I'm very convinced that was an effort to hide this story. Putting out something else unrelated and claiming it was this done to make you go, oh, it was a fake story. I almost thought that was a story that was misattributed until I saw this. That's how that's supposed to work. Now, here is what I'm talking about even more so with the reactive propaganda. So this is on the 16th. Here on the 19th. Guess what happened? They just so happened to get one of these guys to confess. Kamal Adwan Hospital, the director, in fact, of the hospital, confesses, he says, Hamas used the hospital as a military base and recruited him as 2010. And what do you have to prove that? A still shot. Like, I'm actually wondering if they even got him to say it, quite frankly. Doesn't even matter, though. We got here it is. He did it. He said it. Now, the point is, obviously, when people are being interrogated, you can't take what they claim at face value. But this gets even more interesting. Well, before we move past it, realize I find it almost impossible to believe that we've got doctors from other parts of the world who are in this hospital at their own risk, who are gonna just lie about this, even though they have given you literally nothing to prove any of this. And even the one they went desperately hard trying to prove, they got caught lying about, Al-Shifa. Quite frankly, I don't believe them. But here's where this gets even more interesting. This person says lies. He was one of the 70 medical staff that were kidnapped, stripped naked by the Israeli terror forces in Gaza. Exactly. His detention was extended 5 days ago for 45 extra days, so you get the time to threaten and pressure him to give a false confession. We know exactly how you work. Now, before we show you the article, which I think is very relevant, realize that this is the game that people like Eli David were playing. They just accuse, or they just state they're all Hamas because Mossad said so. Even though they then walked it back and said it was only about 10%, even though I think we've proven that every one of them were not. But either way you look at it, only thing that even was in that direction was the Israeli government saying so. That's it. And then what do? They go, oh, we proved that he works for the UN hospital. Therefore, we can prove the UN is Hamas. Well, wait a minute. No, all you proved was that he worked at the hospital. The only thing proving he's Hamas is that you just make that allegation with nothing to back it up. Certainly could be. But this is my point about people that are on this narrative, or people in the two-party illusion, really, on either side, are willing to go along with somebody that says something because it aligns with what they believe or want to believe, especially if it's somebody in a position of authority. We don't have any evidence to back it up at all. Now, this, you would argue, is an evidence point. It's not proof, but it's evidence. Then we go to ask, okay, well, he was a medical doctor. He was stripped naked. They did hold him for 45 days, this is the case. So isn't it possible they pressured him? Yes, obviously. Then, and by the way, guys, take a minute. I actually thought about doing a segment just on this in the future show. There's so many. Just search this title. Israel pressures false testimony. It's like 1,000 articles. My point in this is from 2017 to show you the one that he's discussing, where it was admitted. This is I-24, mainstream Israeli media. Israel court says that Shin Bet pressured a person to give false testimony, which shouldn't surprise you. Wouldn't it surprise you that the United States government does that, or the German government does that, or any government would do that, because governments do that. My point is, though, it's interesting that we wouldn't even, like, the point is this becomes fact because it aligns with the narrative of desperate people. The truth is, it's obvious that they forced false testimony because we've already proven that. Many of the people that gave false testimony, let's not forget, what did they say? We were told to rape all the girls and cut their heads off. Oh, wait a minute. That's been proven to be false. So we already have somebody on the record that they forced to give testimony while he was shaking. Remember that? Beaten up and shaking. And he goes, yeah, we did what you told me to say. Well, they've proven it didn't happen now. So we can already go back and show you the testimony of that shaking Palestinian claiming he did things that they've later gone to the show never happened. So coming back to this point, shouldn't we at least ask whether that keeps happening? Yes, guys, I think they have a very clear tactic, and even Human Rights Watch and Amnesty have called them out for it. So all you end up with is no evidence whatsoever other than pressure testimony, or at the very least somebody saying that under pressure when there's nothing else to back it up, let alone that the entire hospital was a Hamas base because they were trying to cover up what they just did. That's what I think. Reactive. Too late. You already buried people alive, and it's already been discussed. Well, also from Euromed Human Rights Monitor, Israel demolishes Gaza cemeteries, confiscates more dead bodies. You know why? Because it is literally an open secret. They've been caught for it in the past. It was even discussed by corporate media. It was admitted in a court of law. They stole organs from Palestinians. And guess what? They did it again. Because after Al-Shifa, they stole about 150 bodies. They returned them. And what did the doctors say that got them back? They're missing organs. And they said, Hamas, you hate Jews. That's it. No, so that's all. They took organs, and you can prove it. And I went in deeper and showed you that it's an open secret, just like Human Shields, that they do steal the Palestinian organs and use them for all sorts of things, including medical school. And another one from Euromed Human Rights Monitor writes, New Guantanamo. And this goes back to the point he was making. This guy being one of the detained medical staff that we're going to talk about now. Euromed Monitor calls for international probe into Israel's torture and murder of Gaza detainees. And the torture aspect, guys, you do not even need to look hard. It's easily proven. When I just typed that in, I have 4 examples right there from older discussions, like coming from places like Amnesty. And this, by the way, is post October 7th. Horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of Palestinian detainees. Most of this is in the West Bank, by the way. Always. This is their policy. Now, Megatron points out the Israeli Haaretz media has even admitted that some of the civilians who were humiliated by the Israeli army were killed. I argue almost every one of them, if not every single one of these people, are civilians and that they knew that. Quote, in the detention facility at the Yemen field base, several Palestinians have died since the beginning of the war. But don't worry, they're being investigated. That's what we're told. That's from Haaretz. Hundreds of Gazans arrested in the war are imprisoned in the south, blindfolded, handcuffed most of the day. And it says some of them have died. That's what we're talking about, the same groups here. Here it is in Haaretz. Same point. Where several of them have died, Haaretz has learned. The circumstances of the deaths are not yet clear. And they go, we're going to look into it. Hardly. Here are some of the ones that were released from these groups who are telling you what happened to them. Horrifying testimonies from Gaza civilians released by Israel after being falsely blamed as Hamas members. They endured unspeakable torture, human dignity stripped away, subjected to hunger, electric shocks, and medical neglect leading to fatalities. Just look at the way they look right now, guys. Stumbling out, dirty, all in the same stripped out clothes. Each one of them have horrifying, like, you could look at their wrists are like bloody, ripped open from the things they were wearing. Compare that to the people coming back from Gaza right now. Electric shock, hunger, stripped of dignity, torture. Torture that Amnesty International has proven has been taking place since October 7th. Hundreds held for propaganda, enduring brutal and inhumane treatment. Now they're speaking in where was the spot here? I just want to show you the wrists he was showing. I thought it was one even good spot. The point, like where there's, oh, see, his wrists are all bandaged even, which I highly doubt was done while he was in prison. Yeah, see, I mean, you can just see his, his arms. I mean, it's not as bad as what's happening in Gaza, right? But I mean, ultimately, and by the way, some of them got killed. That's the point. But they were treated as prisoners when they did nothing wrong because they were Palestinians, and releasing them even proves that point. This person says, I noticed they still have their heads attached to their bodies. I noticed they haven't been raped. See, this is how it works. That's how atrocity propaganda works. You mean the heads being cut off that did not happen per Owen Jones, who saw the screening and said there was no evidence of that? Or the rapes that there is no proof even took place? There's no evidence. There's no forensic evidence. There's nothing other than allegations by subjective points and evidence that clearly proves we've been lied to about that very same point. I've never said it didn't happen, but we can prove that there's right now no proof to show you that, and prove that they have lied about multiple parts of that agenda. The images that are from 2022, right? The fact that I can prove to you that the actual weight, I mean, the pelvic bone discussion, or the fact that the evidence wasn't taken deliberately, but that's how it works. But this person rightly says, enjoy lies. And he just says, try this. And he posted this article, which, by the way, I went through, and it's the same repetition of the same second and third hand stories coming from the same IDF members. But every time they repost the article, it proves it yet again. No, it doesn't. It is still proving that they don't have anything but narrative. And then he posted this article, which shows you, it's his response to it. And you read it for yourself. It's a good article. But he also gives you the full video so you can watch it because people are questioning what it's just a video, and rightly so, question everything. But the video is from YouTube, and you can watch the full thing with transcripts and everything. Now, as Go pointed out, or many have before, this is just one thing to remind me so you can listen to him saying it right here to Israeli state radio. The Israeli commandos shot the hostages. That's obvious. We know that. It's been proven. Hamas treated us kindly, gave us water, told us to calm down, right? They gave us feminine hygiene, let us pray together. They've all come back looking pretty damn healthy. Now, who knows? Maybe the ones still held have been raped and tortured and beat up. Assuming that will be done. Especially since every indication shows the opposite. But what we can prove is what we're seeing happen to the people that have come back from Israeli prisons, but also that they just shot, as you know, 3 of their own people. 3 hostages were waving white flags and they shot them. Now, their narrative was really desperately trying to act like, well, there was procedure and it was the IDF. They were blaming their own people for not following procedure, even though it's just the most embarrassing thing in the world to prove they're shooting anybody that moves right now. And as they even ask people on the record, it seems like they admit that too. But let's also realize this is not new. Human Rights Watch, 2009, white flag deaths in the killing of Palestinians. It's not new. Here is a host of LBC talking to the same guy, asks, were the Israeli hostages shot because the IDF thought they were Palestinians? Interesting engagement.
In other cases, where the people that are being shot dead are not in fact Israeli hostages, but are in fact Palestinians, has it until now been IDF policy to shoot dead people who are clearly civilians?
Notice that he never flatly dismisses that.
That are Palestinians because they are Palestinians.
As you said, incidences like this are clearly violations of rules of engagement. Our forces have a very clear mission.
What an interesting way to respond to that. Very pointed question. Like, why not just lie and just say, nope, absolutely not? Well, I think at some level they know that we all see this, right? So it's at some level, I think these people begin to operate on some kind of a legal basis. As I just told you, they got more lawyers than anybody, right? That's what he just said. The president said each group has more lawyers than any military in the world. But I think if you know right now that you potentially are going to go to some kind of international criminal court, or maybe that's possible, you might start acting accordingly and start measuring your responses a little more than they have been. Just a thought.
But are in fact Palestinians. Has it until now been IDF policy to shoot dead people who are clearly civilians that are Palestinians because they are Palestinians?
As you said, incidences like this are clearly violations of rules of engagement. Our forces have a very clear mission to distinguish between civilians and between combatants. Hamas tries to make that as difficult as possible.
Not in this case. Not in this case. The firefight was, this is the IDF saying this. The firefight was over. These 3 men were left behind. So just answer my...
And waving white flags. I think they shot them. I mean, being Palestinian is obviously one of the choices. But it gets a little more dark when you realize they shot them because they were hostages.
Question. Were they shot because the IDF thought that they were Palestinian civilians? Is that what happened?
The IDF is investigating the incident. I can't comment on it. This was clearly an awful, awful mistake.
It doesn't get any better. It's very revealing the way he responds to that. So the bottom line is hostages who are held in Gaza have come home and told you that the IDF bombing has visibly killed people that they were held with. Hostages. So you can't dispute this. Despite them, people like this guy right here repeatedly posting the images of the people that have been killed and saying Hamas is responsible. No, you bombed them. You killed them. And let's not forget, they repeatedly continue to refuse a hostage exchange. They know it's on the table. They know it's on the table for all of them, and they repeatedly continue to turn it down. Now, there are talks again right now about considering another deal, guys, but the whole point is they vetoed that agreement. The United States just recently vetoed it. They had to vote again, and they both voted no. And the main thing was all hostages released. They said no, and then went back to bombing where they might be. How do you not understand what that shows you? Then they come home and they go, I watched my friends die next to me. I watched the Bibas family get exploded next to me because you bombed them. And then they go on to say, they still have the Bibas family and we need them home. Think about how appalling that is when they know they're not dead, when they know they're dead. And the people that come home will tell you that they were treated kindly and that a lot of them have hearing damage because of the incessant, nonstop IDF bombing and are now afraid of their own government because they also saw them shoot hostages when they were being taken. They saw them die when they were next to them, and they know that they're not being prioritized. There's people right now are sending videos going, you're not going to let us die here, are you? They call it propaganda, right? But they come home and they say the same thing. So clearly it's not propaganda. That's the face of a very desperate person. Here's another example. Now, this is about the hospital where seemingly everybody covered the story, even corporate media, where there was a sniper that was shooting anybody. Anybody. Now, and this is a place where they were told to leave. They were told to leave, and when they tried to leave, they were killed. That's exactly what we were just talking about. And listen to his response. This is pathetic, and it's meek. And this is the kind of person who they clearly are influencing, like I was talking about at the beginning, who will stand up in the House of Commons, stand up in Congress and say, House of Human Shields and hospitals, and it's their fault, and we have to defend Israel. It's just like day one narrative. It's embarrassing.
And for the Catholic Church in England, sat where you are this time yesterday. And he said that the Israeli Defense Force, as far as he was concerned, had killed churchgoers.
Look, I didn't see that. But if you stand back and say, where are we in terms of Israel, Gaza? We have one side, Israel, which is trying to defend itself against people just being murdered or dragged and taken hostages away.
Oh, is that still happening? It's December 20th. Is that happening today? Did it happen on the 8th? No, it didn't. It was one day. Now, I'm not diminishing that. It's scary for the individuals and the people that died. It's horrifyingly sad. The point is, the narrative has become they're defending themselves, and it makes it sound like they're still fighting off attempts to drag women out of the street. It's not happening. Quite frankly, I question how many rockets are being fired at this point. It's obvious it's one-sided. And so the narrative is, he said he saw them kill people in the street, or kill churchgoers, which, by the way, we just had them admit that and I'll show you next, 2 Christian women were killed inside of a Christian church. And his response is they're doing everything they can to defend themselves. You're not even addressing the allegation. What does that have to do with indiscriminate, targeted killing of innocents where there's no Hamas members around? It's because this person, in my opinion, has an agenda he is achieving.
We have a terrible situation in Gaza that we want to try and end as quickly as possible. But the way to do that, where it could stop right now, is Hamas lay down their weapons. If they got out from behind the hospitals that they're shielding.
Oh, okay. So your only option is Hamas surrender. Okay, well, I don't have control of that. Does she have control of that? Does the U.S., does Israel? Well, no. So clearly it's Hamas's choice. So let's stop pretending like it's the world has to make Hamas lay down. Hamas is not just going to give up and let you murder them. Let's go past that. Okay, so knowing that Hamas is not just going to walk out and go, you win. What else do we do? So the point is they keep making that argument as if it's the only option. And the only option, if they don't do that, is to continue killing where the hostages are. I've said this from day one. In what dynamic do you see them coming home? If your argument, as which they were saying before the first deal, was that we don't deal with terrorists. It was well, clearly you do because it just happened. But let's pretend before it happened. What they were saying was, we're okay with if they never come home because we want the agenda. But you use the hostages to pretend that's why that makes sense, that we're fighting for them as you kill them with your bombing. It's pretty sad. It really makes me sad.
And if they stop using their civilian population as human shields, that's the way to...
No evidence of that whatsoever. Not denying that it would happen or that they're capable of it, but there is no evidence. Even the UN investigation found no evidence. And even when they keep saying that, there is no evidence, and their allegation ultimately amounts to they're using unguided rockets in regard to the civilians on the other side, but also the fact that they claim they're firing them from locations which they're not. And on the other hand, I could play the video again. There's endless amounts of evidence from the Associated Press, from Reuters, from Human Rights Watch, from Amnesty, from the United Nations that says point blank, they're using human shields. And that was before 2009. Then it went into calling it the neighbor procedure, which the international community also deemed a war crime. And you know what? They never stopped using it. This is why it's so obvious. Those same people who know that pretend like it's not happening right now. That is influence.
Stop it right now. And if Hamas are refusing to do that, Israel has a right to defend themselves against an organization that says it will come back time and time and time again.
No, that was just one of the leaders that's currently protected by Israel and Qatar. By the way, Qatar is the one mediating the hostage discussion, right? So ask yourself why Israel allows Qatar to be the mediator while Qatar's protecting the leadership of Hamas in Qatar. And Netanyahu even said he wasn't going to go after him during this war. Why? Because they're clearly being funded and at least somehow influenced, right? Every time they stand up and they go, we want to kill Jews and we're going to keep doing it. Isn't that, it's just like, oh, really? Exactly what they're saying you're saying? Meanwhile, over here, that's not being said. That's not being expressed from the people in Gaza. You can't play this only one way. You have to acknowledge that Netanyahu and the United States have funded have funded Hamas and have used them exactly like this. This is just disingenuous in every possible way. Here's another one. Mark Regev this was the, oh yes, and it's the church. It's the same point. Most of these are about the church and the same dynamic. Listen to the way he responds about this.
Clip, please, Mr. Regev. It's from Layla Moran, a Liberal Democrat member of Parliament here, who has family who are in that church.
Now they are without water, without food, and there is a sniper inside the compound. There's a woman and her daughter who have been killed, and what's been happening is as they try and leave their rooms, say to go to the toilet or something, there is firing at them. Either the rules of engagement are being ignored or there is a plan to clear the whole of Gaza. Whatever it is, it needs to stop. My family are not justifiable collateral damage in this war. They have nothing to do with Hamas. They do not deserve this, and nor do the tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians who have died so far either.
So what's interesting is this is how far-reaching this is getting now, right? Where you have overlap. As we know, there are hundreds of Palestinian Americans, Palestinian Britons. So what's happening is you have family like Robert Inlakesh, by the way, who's had hundreds killed, by the way, of family and connected people they know, which is horrifying. And yet he still objectively writes about this topic. That they have people that are like, look, I have family there. I know where they live. I've been to their home. They're not Hamas. And then these kind of clowns stand up and act like they know. It's just, this is one of the endless umpteenth reason that people see through what they're doing right now. But so she asks a very clear question. Here's a family member of them who knows they're not Hamas, who knows what's going on, who says they're being fired at by snipers if they even go outside while they're being told to leave the area. Very pointed question. You probably won't be surprised the way he answers.
Mr. Regev, you heard Layla Moran there say her family and thousands of others in Gaza shouldn't be collateral damage for Israel's war. What would you say to her?
I'd agree with her. We don't want to see a single civilian caught up in the crossfire. And that's why, as already as 2 months ago, when we knew the area where the church was going to be a war zone, that we urged civilians to leave the area.
Oh, okay. I get it. So you're not addressing the allegation that they're firing on people that they know aren't Hamas. Clearly. You just make it their fault. You victim blame. That's what he's doing. Well, we dropped some paper here and there, so they should be out of the way. Well, what if it's people that can't leave? As you know, there are many children, pregnant people, people on ventilators, elderly people, people with limbs blown off because of previous bombings. But it doesn't matter is the point. They're guilty because they're there. That's a crime. He's literally admitting to it. We don't even care if they're Hamas. If they're present, we claim they're terrorists. It's right out of the U.S. playbook. In fact, it stems from Israel. That's his answer. They're there. It's their fault.
Yeah. Precisely because we did know it would become a war zone and we didn't want to see them caught up in the crossfire. And the truth is,
Seeing nearly 20,000 civilian deaths since the war began.
Let's be clear. Some 95% of the civilians of northern Gaza, and specifically of that area, chose to heed our advice and to leave, and in so doing, so saved their lives.
No. Many of them died on the way, but you know that. You bombed them. You know that, right? You killed many of them as they were going in the direction you told them to go. You killed many of them when they got there. That's reality. You killed many of them when in every location around the Gaza area. The idea that they would pretend that 95%, which by the way is also a lie. They keep trying to pretend. First of all, let's not forget that they argued that they cleared northern Gaza. Clearly, that's not true, as they're being destroyed. But the reality is that's not even the truth. They wanted you to think that whatever they did in northern Gaza was exactly the way he tried to describe it, that they stayed there, therefore they're all terrorists. It's not even remotely that. There's a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people in many locations that are still in northern Gaza, many of them in these hospitals that are being manned by people from outside of Gaza, who then they call Hamas because they're helping people.
I have to explain, and I'm sure if you can see the pictures of the area, this is an intensive combat zone where we've taken casualties in our soldiers. We've been
a hospital and a residential area. Thank you for admitting that. Not Hamas, not a Hamas location, not a Hamas tunnel, but a civilian location. He's insinuating it's all Hamas. These are places of civilian life. That doesn't exist in Gaza right now. That's the sad reality. And don't forget, as even the UN said, there is nowhere safe. Not the fake humanitarian zones where they bomb all the time. There is nowhere safe. So why would they heed the warning to go to another unsafe place and risk being bombed while they're not under a roof somewhere? If that's even what they're lucky enough to have right now.
And firefights with the Hamas terrorists, close quarter fighting, not easy.
I barely even believe that's happening as much as they say it is, quite frankly.
And obviously it's best if civilians leave the area. Now, these people have stayed. And there is
he just admitted they were civilians. He just admitted that they're firing on civilians. Trapped himself with his own broken logic.
In the church, and we will make an utmost effort to make sure that they remain safe.
Oh, is that and by doing that, you're firing on them when they go to try to go pee outside, which is what she just said. What's the family member stated? Because that's what they're being told who are there. You end by saying we're doing our utmost not to shoot them as you just get told you're openly firing at them indiscriminately. That's all you got, man. That's all you got. Not true. It's their fault. You hate Jews. Shut up. You're racist. That's it. That's it. Here's another one. This one is the worst I've seen in a long time. During a TV interview, the deputy mayor of Jerusalem basically denied the existence of churches in Gaza, which you can easily prove, then denied that they were Christians at all. So that's why the churches don't make sense. And then that's also not true. Then when in as far as she lies, gets caught in a lie. So jumps, oh, I meant this. And that's a lie. Oh, wait, no, I meant this instead. It's embarrassing.
A ceasefire means the return of the hostages and the dismantlement of a genocidal regime that has stated that they're going to attack us again.
That's why they did that. Right? That's the core point, even though that was one element of a leadership person that they're protecting in Qatar. But listen to what she's saying. If they release all the hostages.
The dismantlement fire means the return of the hostages and the dismantlement of a genocidal regime that has stated that they're going to attack us again.
It does.
Then everybody would be in favor of a ceasefire.
Nope, you're not, though. So that's confusing. So there's our first lie. Because it's the most obvious thing in the world right now to prove to you that that is what they want. Just in case you're unclear about this, the reality is that they voted for a ceasefire, right? And the U.S. vetoed it. Only one vetoed. And what was included in that? Immediate, unconditional release of all hostages. Veto. Okay, fine. So they went, okay, we're going to vote again. We're going to force it. And they're going to vote again without a veto possibility. Guess what? They voted no, but it went forward. It passed. But Israel voted no and the U.S. voted no. What was the primary point? call for protection for both Israeli and Palestinian civilians, and the demand of the immediate release of all hostages. So why is she lying? Why is she trying to pretend that nobody wanted that? Why is she saying the only reason we're not letting a ceasefire is because we don't have all the hostages? They're lying. They know they've refused the hostages. They did the first week. They did the second week. They did the third week. They did the fourth week. They allowed a small pause to get some of them back and then broke that and went forward and keeps killing them. And from the first week, Hamas has offered the entire thing per Hamas, per the UN, per everybody involved. Only the Israeli government and the US are stopping this from happening. It's disgusting. These people are disgusting.
If a ceasefire means that we're just going to keep them quiet for a bit until they attack again, then it's Israel's obligation to defend its citizens.
And by defend her citizens, she means indiscriminately bomb Gaza. Totally different than actually defending yourself, but we'll just reimagine what words mean. But the same point applies. They already did offer the hostages. And it does include the agreement in regard to Hamas. Like, this has all been discussed. They just pretend it's not there because they apparently want to kill Palestinians.
And destroy that threat, don't you think?
Why is it necessary, is reported, to start shooting, having snipers outside a church?
Cuts right to the chase. Oh, really? You want a ceasefire? Why are you firing on civilians without nobody, right to the point. A sniper is firing on civilians with nothing else around, no matter what they do, even as you told them to leave. What's your response?
I saw the reports this morning. The church, there are no churches in Gaza, so I'm not quite sure where the report.
See, in past, the Israeli elements are so used to just being able to just float lies like that, with the corporate media just too, I guess, meek to push back. That time is gone because of what they've been doing. So he pushes back because there's obviously churches in Gaza. Well, I mean, even if you think there's no Christians, which there are, how do you pretend that some of the most core elements of Christian history are not in Gaza? It's dumb. Now, or you could say they've been destroyed, but that's not true. Many of them have been destroyed, by the way, by Israeli bombing since October 7th. But there are churches that are still there.
So I'm not quite sure where the report is talking about.
There's a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because they were.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so I lied. But no, I meant no Christians, though, so it doesn't apply.
Driven out by
respectfully, there are Christians, because I spoke to an MP yesterday who has family members in the church who are Christians.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know who was attacked. I didn't see the report.
Wow. I speechless. I mean, that's bad. These people are being put out to lie. Or it's of their own volition, and they're all choosing to lie. You can look at it however you want. That's crazy. So yeah, there are churches, and yes, there are Christians, and it ends with, well, I didn't see the report, so I'm not even sure what happened. Pathetic. So, as I simply put, these Zionists are all pathological liars. I believe the Zionist ideology is dangerous, but I'm certainly somebody who may, in like any other circumstance, believe Zionism is something else and believe they are and not be what that is. Like, that's just, so I never like to do broad stroke anything, by the way, because it's not ever an intelligent thing to broad stroke any one group of anything, even if it's extremism. But the point is, not only has the ceasefire included the release of all hostages, but the U.S. was the sole veto. Then both Israel and the U.S. voted against the second one, which they are currently ignoring. And Michael Fawns points out, first she says, well, I've already said it many times, just the repetitiveness of what she's doing and how embarrassing it is. But I'll include this for you to check for yourself, right? What the U.S. vetoed and what they did vote for, even though the U.S. and Israel both said no. And then here's the actual image so you can see it for yourself, which is weirdly hard to find these days. Even on the UN website, it doesn't seem easy to find. But the point is, you can see for yourself, Israel vetoed taking their own hostages home, and so did the United States. Along with the freedom-loving nations of Austria, Chechnya, Guatemala, Micronesia, Liberia, Papua New Guinea, Paraguay, and the United States. All the hardcore democracies of the world, right? Anyway, lastly, 2 points. Here is the UN ambassador to the United Nations. saying there's no such thing as a humanitarian ceasefire. Well, yeah, we know you think that, man. We know that's your opinion. We know you don't like helping Palestinians, but listen to what he actually says. Basically, this is a guy who just got done telling you that UN is Hamas, who is now literally chastising the UN to do what he wants.
What is the meaning of this humanitarian ceasefire?
Human life, civilians. But I know you don't care about that, so please continue.
There's no such a thing. This is one big lie, a whitewashing of the truth.
Nobody in this room believes him. That's what's so hilarious. Like, who's he talking to? He's aiming this at Western audiences who believe the political side.
Humanitarian ceasefire means a terrorist-saving ceasefire.
Well, what's hilarious about that is by every single metric, and even the people in the Israeli side of the conversation, Israel is losing this. They're getting, because they've never really been good at the engagement of the guerrilla warfare in Gaza. Every time they've done this, they've been annihilated. 2014 was an obvious example. Who knows? Something might have changed. But the point is, at every level of this, Hamas is not gaining anything. The ceasefire element of this is beneficial for one. Let's put it this way. A ceasefire is a stopping of engagement from all sides. So it's an equal footing. Gaza is an open-air prison. Nothing changes for what their circumstances are other than what they can develop from within Gaza. So there's some of that. But the only thing that really that they don't want is the fact that this then changes our understanding of it. Journalists can go in, people can report, the evidence becomes clear, and the more time in between their next agenda, their next action, their next statement that we can evaluate. They know they're caught right now. That's what you can feel in the way he's talking to these people like they're children.
We're not stupid. This resolution only seeks an end to the war against Hamas Nazis.
Wow. Perfect way to end the show. Hamas Nazis. I mean, that's just silly. I mean, it really is. Are they white supremacists now?
Sorry for the words. You don't give a damn about Israel and our future.
Wow. So, this is actually really telling. He's like a sullen child because they've lost control and they know that. Their last attempt is some kind of weird guilt trip power move that everyone's probably snickering about. Like, he's talking to the rest of the United Nations elements in the room. These are people that are all voted a certain way. They know where they stand. And what do you think this is going to accomplish? You're stomping your feet and whining in front of the UN. It's embarrassing.
An end to the war means turning our backs on the hostages.
See, this is my main point of playing this. You mean the hostages that you've twice refused to take home? More than that, actually, twice since the fake ceasefire? The whole point is that everything they've done demonstrates that at the very least, the hostages are not their high priority. They've refused to take them home multiple times from the very first week. And they've continued to bomb where they are. And we now know, because of hostages that come home, that they killed some of them while they were there. Do you think they want more coming home telling that story? The last thing they seem to care about is the people that got taken.
It means ensuring Hamas's continued rule in Gaza. All a ceasefire
of Hamas that Israel funded and allowed to take control, of course.
Secures is a future for the genocidal jihadists. It is only Hamas that this resolution is defending. Stop hiding your intentions behind your suits and diplomatic wording. Humanitarian ceasefire. This resolution has a distorted agenda. At least make this clear to all member states. This resolution aims to keep Hamas in power.
This is the inversion of the reality. Like, I'm sure you could believe that. And obviously whoever made this cut piece is out there, just so that's clear. I just grabbed this for the point to make here. And, as somebody says in the chat, right, this is not the loss of control. This is the narrative itself. It may be right. But, what I have a problem with is people who would argue that is the case and then use that to ignore what's being proven right now. We can acknowledge, or you could argue that your belief is that this is what we're supposed to be thinking and what we're supposed to be told, and also still maintain the reality that this is still the truth about Israel. And you could disagree with that, but argue like the argument somehow that by us discussing this, it's somehow us being tricked is just silly. Because the reality is that we're continuing to engage objectively with the information as it goes forward. And the moment that we see this dovetail into some kind of an agenda using this momentum, I'm going to be the first one to call it out. And even then, if it turns out that me covering it the way I have ends up feeling like it benefited what they were accomplishing, I'll be the first to tell you that too. It's important. But I trust me, I'm very on guard to how this could be used, right? To why the corporate media is suddenly calling these things out. Trust me. I'm 50-50 at this point. It's very conspicuous, but I can understand logically why it would go this way with how transparent it's gotten. And I don't think that's on purpose, but again, maybe you're right, right? That's certainly possible. And we have to consider those possibilities. But this to me, at the very least, when's the last time you saw something like this? The way it's being done, the seeming desperation that's just dripping off everything they're doing. It's interesting. Lastly, Elon Levy says, after everything we talked about today, Israel sees civilian death as a tragedy. Hamas sees them as a strategy. Well, I'll leave you to consider the difference. After what we've seen, after the people that have come home, right, who are telling a different story, treated kindly, and so on, which, of course, that could be a ploy by Hamas. That's obviously something you should consider. Then comparing that to what continues to happen to Palestinians, the torture, the rape, the organ harvesting. It's just very, 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 very transparent. I'm not going to say Hamas is going to care about civil. I don't know who drives the ideology behind that, whether it's Israel or something else. But I very clearly see the Zionist entity and what they have done, what we can prove they've done, what they can prove they're doing right now. That's static. It's obvious. They've even admitted to most of it. So consider that this is, in fact, something that is being, like, whether it's the revelation of what they really are or the destruction leading into the next step. My point is, it's still who they are. And that has to be seen, because if the narrative starts becoming that Netanyahu's the only problem, which I feel on the horizon, and that the same elements in control are just, he's the bad apple, and suddenly all that will lead to is the continuation of the same problem they want to continue. Or suddenly Hamas gets removed and they're still, but it's the same government with the same agenda, it's not going to change the Palestinians' lives. That's what's important. The civilians, or by the way, the Israeli civilians, who equally don't want that government in control. We, as the population of the planet, the civilians that live here, the respective populations of the governments and countries around the world, we need to acknowledge that we are in the same plight. Hardly the same as what the Palestinians are going through, but the realization that we are all being stepped on, suppressed, rights being removed by the people acting like they're fighting for your rights. It's rapidly escalating. We all feel it right now. It's just time that we acknowledge that we're on the same path, left, right. It doesn't matter anymore, guys. I just wish people could see through that. Like, it's such an obvious, important time to capitalize on that awareness. If you're out there and you see yourself as right and left, and that's completely your prerogative, but you're able to see through the illusion, the larger illusion. And I don't mean just acting like the Republicans that are on your side are now patriots. And that's just a sidestep from the same illusion. Recognizing that voting for a Republican or a Democrat is still part of the problem. I'm not saying I have all the solutions, but until we can recognize this binary system that keeps us trapped into the same cycle of willful ignorance, then we will never change the outcome, let alone save the lives of people that are being hurt around the world. In your name, in our name. Stand up. It's time to take action, and I don't mean violence. I know you know what I'm talking about. I know you guys are passionate. I know that you have the kind of empathy that we need today. So show it. If you'd like to support this platform, guys, beneath the video itself, there's lots of ways. And the main thing I've been talking about lately, because we have a lot planned, as I keep discussing, and you will see more and more coming. I think that the best way to support this platform is to go on the website and sign up on the donation page for $1 a month. It's easy. You can forget about it. You can look the other direction. And a lot of people make this point. Like, if you think about it, we have on any number of platforms, millions of views on individual videos. Like, I have 100,000 views. I'm here, 500,000 views there, 1 million views on videos and on some of our most large ones, but usually, 20, 30, 40,000 on individual platforms, Rumble being the largest right now. And the point is, if we just get a fraction of that, if just 1,000 people sign up for $1, $1,000 a month right there, which will allow me to hire somebody new to put out more content, and quite frankly, the point is that, we'll continue doing this, which is obviously not in my interest to say. I will keep doing this because I care about this. But if you want to see this grow and you want to see us step into new arenas and start doing more documentaries and on the ground, I'd like to see on the ground reporting by people from TLAV, to be at the political discussion, to be, working our way into some kind of State Department discussion, or have following up on real world action. What's going on in this protest? What's happening over here with this? What happened in East Palestine today? I would love to have that real world stuff to tap into from the show. Breaking news on the ground from X, Y, and Z. And we can do that to a degree, but it all comes with more resources. And I don't just mean money, but definitely that. So as always, we'll keep doing this because we believe in it and we believe in you. But I'd like to make this something different, to change the game, to be able to push back even more. So help us do that. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.